And we did have our first anniversary. For those who were able to attend, there was a town hall at the Barnett Rec Center where we were joined by members of the community, IG Hendricks, Mr. Tobias, and myself. And we had a pretty good Q&A with folks. We answered some questions that had been submitted previous to, and then members of the community were able to come up and kind of converse with us. So I think it went well. Thank you to all the community members who were able to come out and join us. Before we actually get started with our official agenda, I wanted to recognize and welcome our 3 newest review board members to their very first meeting. Immediately prior to this meeting, they were officially sworn in, and as of today are able to sit on subcommittees and take assignments and participate in board duties. So at this time, I would like to start with Mr. Vicente, and we can go around and they can each introduce themselves to the rest of the board and the community.
Thank you, Board Chair Burns. Josue Vicente, first time here. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be part of this great group, obviously advancing and working on behalf of the city and the citizens. So I'm very glad to be here today and then continue working. And I hope that I can bring some positive to this board and moving forward, to helping advance the citizens and the effort of the police in providing services to its citizens in the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Ford.
Thank you, Chair Burns. Glad to be here. My name is James Ford. I have been a business owner downtown for 29 years now, and I'm glad to be here and be active in the community, as I've been over the last few years, and look forward to working with you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Ms. Pinkleton.
Thank you, Chairwoman Burns. I'm Kelly Pinkleton, and I too am glad to be here, honored to serve on this board, to work with the staff, with the IG, and with my other esteemed board members. Thank you.
All right, welcome to all of you. For the first order of business, I hope everyone has had an opportunity to look at the minutes from the previous meeting. Does anyone have any questions, or have you had the opportunity to check out the meeting minutes? Yes, Mr. Tobias.
So just a point of order here. I'm doing the math as I'm looking around the table. Because the 3 new board members were not participating previously, and they can't vote on minutes and on the committee reviews, and if there's 9 members on the board, 5 is going to be majority. I'm looking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, so you're 4. Do we have 4 original members? 1, 2, 3.
Yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure we had enough to vote on like minutes and.
Oh, yes. I counted the original members
Oh, and-
before. Yeah.
Sitting right next
Yeah.
to me. I'm so used to the administrative folks sitting here that you're at the kids' table today.
Matt got sprinkled in with y'all. All right, any additions and/or corrections on the minutes? If not, I would entertain a motion to pass the meeting. Thank you. Second, it's been moved and seconded. Any other discussions or questions? All in favor of approving the minutes, please raise your hands. All right, the ayes have it. Minutes have been accepted. Thank you. Now I'll turn it over to the Inspector General for an update.
First, I would like to say good afternoon. Thank you so much. I want to start off by saying I super appreciate the honor that the board gave by selecting me to be the Inspector General and allowing me to be in the position to not only but make change, but also put together an office full of staff and people going forward that will be great as far as going forward and making sure that we make a difference, whether I'm here or the next IG is here. So I want to thank you so much for that opportunity. I'm going to just kind of go over the annual report. There is a report that I did sit down for everybody in front of them. So I'm going to do a PowerPoint presentation, but it's going to be really brief because I know there's a lot of reports in which we have to get done, but there's some important information I want to make sure that we at least got through. I'm going to try to see, does that work? Oh, there we go. It's kind of good just to kind of stand up. Is my voice loud enough?
Well, we kind of need you on microphone.
Oh, okay. Well, then I will sit here. Take it off. Take it off. Yeah, it's just easier sometimes to kind of stand and walk around. So first, just some facts. I got appointed as the Inspector General in February the 1st 2020. I began employment with the City of Columbus in February 28, 2020. The office began accepting citizen complaints July the 11th of 2022, just giving you a little bit of time frame from the time I took office to setting up the office and us starting to accept citizen complaints was about 5 months. And before we actually started accepting complaints, we had a staff. We had the Inspector General, Deputy Inspector General, we had Executive Assistant to the board, Executive Assistant to the office. We also had a Community Relations Coordinator, and at that time, we had 5 IG investigators. During that time frame before we became operational, we employed this matrix, which is our CMS, our case management system. Our staff went through a lot of investigations, a lot of training, and the process at the time when we opened, we didn't have access to some of the systems we have access to now. We actually had to make requests to CPD for all of those systems. So here's where we are now, being open for 1 year. We have processed and received 1,569 citizen complaints. You can see the breakdown. I won't go through the breakdown, but we know that citizens are able to file complaints through the hotline. They can email us. We have, they can go on the website, it's a smart sheet, we get that information. They can call us on the main line, we take complaints in person, mail, and we have board-initiated complaints. And at any point in time, if you have any questions, please stop me. I'm just going to kind of go through. Up to this date, out of the 1,569 citizen complaints we received, we process, so we close complaints if we don't get additional information. So with that saying, we close 1,177 complaints, which basically tells me that we still need to continue our community outreach so that when citizens file complaints with our office, they understand the information that we need. Some of those complaints, we get complaints regarding a lot of things that do not necessarily involve CPD. We get other officers, we get complaints because we're the Inspector General office. Sometimes we get complaints involving inspections. So the community relation part is not done. Still want to make sure that we're getting out there and so citizens understand who we are. But out of that, we opened up 307 investigations to this date. That's what we have investigated. We still have 4 that are administratively on hold, and as of that date, when we say 79 pending, what happens is when we get complaints, sometimes citizens don't give us all of the information, so it takes time to contact those citizens, try to get additional information. Sometimes people don't give us dates, they don't tell us date times, so it still takes time for us to go back, do some follow-up to get that information. But this is all of as of July the 11th, 2003. So when I said that we closed 1,177, this gives you a little breakdown of the complaints we receive and why we close them. Sometimes we get complaints that exceed 90 days. 59 of those were 90 days. I tell you, we get complaints that are informational only. They don't involve CPD allegations. Sometimes you're just calling to get information. So out of that, that's 119. I won't go through everything. What I will say is what we try to make sure that we do is every complaint that we get, it's a way for us to provide some information for citizens. So we are still processing these, whether we're calling the person back and trying to give them the agency that would assist them in either giving a police report. Sometimes we get complaints, again, I say from other law enforcement agencies, just letting them know, hey, we don't have that jurisdiction, as you can see where it says no jurisdiction, 218, because sometimes they involve Whitehall. It's another police agency that's local. Some of them times they involve the state police. We've actually gotten complaints outside Cincinnati. So, you know, again, we still are processing these complaints. And the nice thing is that since we have been established, when it says referred to another agency, CPD sometimes get complaints that they have been referring to us that they realize is something that we should be investigating. So as of today, out of those 307 investigations, actively, we still have 64 that are still active, meaning they're still investigating those. But we have closed 238 investigations. This is just a little breakdown when it says category of allegations. So, of course, there is a list of allegations that we look at from anywhere from actions taken, not taken, whether there's body cam footage, whether there's an allegation of racial profiling, rude or discourteous profanity, uniform use of authorities. These allegations are based on the complaint. So when we get a complaint, it may have more than one allegation attached to it. So that's the totals that we're using here are the different complaints that we have, and the totals are the totals based on the category of allegations that we are individually investigating. And that tells you at the end that there are 410 allegations that we have investigated. The last part of here, what you look at is it says categories of allegations, and this talks about the dispositions in our findings. So our findings can either be exonerated, not sustained and conclusive, can be sustained misconduct, unfounded, and administrative close, or withdrawal. One thing that you're going to also find is with the withdrawals, even if we have a complainant that files a complaint and then later on they call back and they say, hey, I want to withdraw that, depending on the allegation, if we still have enough information to investigate and we found that the allegation did involve an action of an officer, even though they have wished to withdraw it, we may not necessarily we will let them withdraw it, but we still will look at the allegations. Most of the times when people want to withdraw, if they didn't give us any additional information, and this happens quite often when we're trying to call to follow up and they're like, no, we want to withdraw, we're not going to give you any more information. So in cases like that, we have to close it because we don't have any more information in which to proceed with an investigation. Administrative close usually are cases, again, it can be a case that we've looked at. We do have on numerous occasions complainants that file complaints. We're trying to follow up on information, trying to follow up. We can't get any more information, so sometimes those cases do have to be administratively closed. But if you look at that, what you'll be able to see is the total of all of these allegations. And these allegations, when we look at exonerated, non-sustained, sustained, unfounded, administrative close, or withdrawal, these are based on officers. So when we get a complaint, even though the allegation may be actions taken, not taken, it may involve more than one officer. So the allegations that you're looking here when we say exonerate or not, these are per officers that we looked at and investigated. And I know I'm going really fast. So some important things that I think is just want to really bring out to the board is that since we have been operational for 1 year, we have actively looked at and investigated 1,569 complaints that come into this office. Anytime someone calls our office or files a complaint, it goes into our system, we look at it, we follow up on it. That is giving us an average of 131 complaints per month. Out of that, we want to say a total citizen complaints closed at the rate was like 1,177. And that's still a significant amount, but what we say is because we're following up. So when we follow up, whether we get information, additional information, and we're able to proceed, or if the complaints that are coming in are just complaints that we don't have jurisdiction or they involve somebody else. So the thing that we do know is that citizens are aware that we're out. We still need to continue to educate citizens so that they understand exactly what we do, what our jurisdiction is. And when they file a complaint, it's really important that they understand that we need contact information so that we can follow up on the complaint, because there are several complaints that we do close because citizens don't provide us additional information in which we can proceed. But if we've got a phone number, if we got an email address, we use all of those different information to try to reach out to the citizens. Again, when we look at the total number of citizen complaints open into investigations, to this date, we've opened up 307 investigations. That's averaging about 26 cases per month. You may say, hey, that sounds like a small total, maybe, maybe not, but it's a lot of work when these investigators are investigating these cases. I mean, you've got the allegation, and then you got to talk to who the officers are. You're reviewing body cam, you're reviewing CAD reports, you're reviewing police reports, you're requesting unit history. Not only that, but you also have to research CPD policy and procedure, because that's what we're investigating. The allegation that comes in, at the end of the day, what we're looking at is whether or not the allegation that is filed by the citizen is whether or not that officer violated policy and procedure. Out of that, total allegations investigated, total allegations was 410. And when we look at the total number of allegations and dispositions of finding per officers, we were looking at 745. This is where we are today, just saying how we have moved the progression and looking at the totals as we go forward. So we started off with a staff of 5 investigators. As of today, and as we're growing, our staff has grown. We have an investigator supervisor now. We have 7 investigators. We also have worked with civil service to create an IG intake specialist position. It's vacant right now, but once we get city council approval, we will be hiring 2 intake specialists, and they will handle the intake of all of those complaints that we have. As you can see, we are definitely growing, and we want to make sure that we're being more efficient and productive. Continuing training, all of the training that the investigators went through in the beginning, we will be going back through that training again. And if you look in the handout that you have before you, it lists a lot of the training, ABCs of policing, Fourth Amendment, I think, what was the other one? Axon. So it's a lot. I also wanted to point out when it says direct access to CPD systems, when I started off, I said how in the beginning, when we opened up, which was July the 11th, we didn't have access to any of these systems. Everything that you see, we had to request. So now we have access to Axon, so we can review the body cam footage. We have access to Power DMS, which is CPD's system that allows us to research CPD's policies and procedures. We have access to PoliceNet that allows us to pull police reports. We just recently finished our training, and I just, for lack of not knowing the exact name of the system, the training was called V15 CAD system. We have access to CAD now, so we don't have to do CAD requests. CAD allows us to pull the CAD reports, unit history. It allows us to listen to 911 calls. It allows us to listen to radio calls. So as you can see, as we're growing, we're being more efficient, we're being more productive, but it also means that the investigators have to continue to do the training. When it comes to community outreach, just want you to know we have attended something like 23 community events. We have IG posters out now. Our posters are in public libraries, some convenience stores, some gas stations. It just is giving people more information about our office, how to contact us, how to make complaints. We have distributed over 4,500 pamphlets in all of the different events that we've had. And on our anniversary date, we had our first Columbus IG Town Hall series, which was Come Talk to the IG. So we have another one coming up. So again, we're just trying to do our best to make sure that we get out there, the community knows who we are, and we're able to answer any questions that the community has. So with that, I didn't know if there was any questions. Yes.
I wondered if you might keep a stat. I'm just curious, well, really two things. Number one, how many cases did the board disagree with the IG's findings? If we could just keep that stat, I would just be curious over time, is that number decreasing, so that as you learn what the board wants or can anticipate what the board wants, or is it a constant 2 to 3 a month, or what is the number in which the board sent it back to the IG for, a different disposition? Second, I think we'll probably tackle this at some point, and that is what's happening to our cases that we are making recommendations to the police chief. Where are those cases, and how often might we get some sort of a report? Doing it on a yearly basis is not enough. So can we get, regular reports of what's going on with the cases where we're recommending discipline or a change of policy?
Well, what I can tell you is we do know that all of the cases that the board has reviewed, the process of going through CPD, that process is happening. Now, as far as any disciplinary actions occurring right now, I don't believe that it has reached that, but I am working with the chief so that once they come about and she has a chance to review that, if there's any disciplinary actions that does take place, that we can work on getting that information. So we are aware of that, and we are working with that. And so the other thing I will say, as far as keeping stats, when the board agrees or disagrees with the IG's office, we definitely we can do that. We just want to make sure that 9 times, the policies and procedures when we do the investigations are based on policy and procedure. So when the board disagrees, we just want to make sure that we know that the board may not necessarily disagree with the policy and procedure, but we do know that the board has made recommendations that additional training or additional things are done through CPD. And so we definitely will make sure that we keep track of that going forward. We have to put all of that stuff in our database, but we are, as we get the information, I will say, as we get the reports back from CPD, we're trying to keep abreast with CPD's recommendations also. Yes.
Are the CPD policies that are outlined in Power DMS, are those available public record? Or, second question, is the board able to, and maybe this is better for Ms. Ross, is the board allowed to have access to Power DMS to be able to read the policies?
The policies and procedures actually may be something that the board could have access to. There are certain systems that the board will not have access to because you are members of the public, because the IG is an investigatory entity. There were policies and procedures that we were allowed to go through to get into an MOU with CPD to be able to view those, because there's certain lead information in those other systems. But if we're just talking about policies and procedures, I don't know that that should be an issue. So we'll look into that. And Rob, I'll let you know.
And also, we can always attach, because whatever policies and procedures we look at, that is a part of our case, and if that's something that the board wants us to start forwarding on with the report, just please let us know that, and we can start forwarding that on with the report.
Yeah, I think a general access to is helpful if we have the ability to go look at the policy. I don't know that I want them all attached, because sometimes you all attach or cite multiple policies. And so
Right.
I think that can get a little voluminous if every time you cite a policy, you're attaching it. But if I've worked with Power DMS in a different system before,
Okay.
so I know how easy it is to just copy, like to find a word you're looking for, to find a policy number and then read it right there. And so that's what I'm wondering, if we have access to be able to see the policies, I think it may actually help us better connect a finding to a policy. And if we see what the policy is, then our recommendations may actually be a little bit more on point, if we can actually read them.
And just because we have some new board members here today. If you are looking for directives, CPD directives are on their website. Very easy for you to go and look up. But if you're talking about specific SOPs for specific divisions, that is going to have to be found through Power DMS. So in the interim, if you're looking for a CPD directive, that is a general directive of sorts for all divisions in CPD, you can go to CPD's website and pull from there. If you are looking for an SOP that is specific to a particular division, you'll have to wait until we can figure out what access looks like for the board for Power DMS.
And just stepping forward, what I was going to do now is, because we hired some different investigators, I wanted to just take 2 minutes, because I think it's important that the board has a chance to, when you're reading different reports, to put the face with the report and also who the investigator is, a little bit about their experience. So if you can just indulge me for a few minutes, I told them about 2 minutes. All of my investigators that are new are going to come and introduce themselves, and then towards the end, we'll have the board secretary, because you have a new secretary, for her to be able to introduce herself too, so.
Good afternoon, board members. My name's Larry Ferguson. As of about 36 hours ago, I'm the newest hire in the Inspector General's office. My background basically has been law enforcement. I was a retiree. I just came back into public service yesterday. I worked for the Division of Police, Columbus, for 36 years. 29 out of 36 years I was in patrol operations, worked all sides of Columbus, primarily was assigned to the northwest and northeast sides of the city. My last 7 years of service with the police department was in internal affairs. So I'm honored to be back. I see you smiling. I came back, Willard. I'm honored to be back. To serve in this particular capacity as far as being an investigator with the Inspector General's office. What I hope to add with my experience, skill set, knowledge base that I've accumulated over the years, hopefully I will be a big asset toward all investigations that I'm assigned to. So if you see Larry Ferguson's name on the investigation, this is the face.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Oh, I have to speak. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Danielle Fisher. I have 22 years of investigative experience, 16 years in Seattle, Washington. My investigative journey began with the Defenders Association, working for death row inmates. My degree is from the University of Washington. From there, I went to Las Vegas, Nevada, 17 years there with Clark County, juvenile probation, and then the Emergency Response Task Force for 8 years, working with law enforcement there. It's a pleasure to serve in this capacity. It's a pleasure to be back home, sorry. And that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kim Gorman. I'm originally from Fort Wayne, Indiana. I moved to Columbus, Ohio in 1998, and I worked as a fraud investigator with the Bureau of Workers' Comp. I was there for approximately 15 years, and I had to go back home to Fort Wayne to take care of my ailing mother, and she passed away 4 years ago this month, and I've always wanted to come back to Columbus because I love the city. I worked in Fort Wayne with the Department of Children's Services for 10 years as a family case manager. I actually got my education, my higher education here in Ohio. I have Bachelor's of Arts from Capital University, and I have 2 master's degrees from Tiffin University in different areas of criminal justice. I'm just happy to be back here, and I'm here to help make a difference with the city and working with the IG. It's an honor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Board. My name is Ben Rice. I'm from Columbus, Ohio, proud native, and I went to school at Ohio Dominican University. Had a great teacher, Dr. Jones. And then after Ohio Dominican, I went to the city attorney's office. I spent 4 years in the domestic violence and stalking unit. Very good 4 years, and the last 2 years I've been in insurance as a liability and coverage investigator, and now I'm back with the city, and I'm honored to be here to serve. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Board. First and foremost, I want to say it's an honor to be a part of the Department of Inspector General alongside with our great team. My name is Asia Welch, and I am a native of Columbus, Ohio. I am a graduate from The Ohio State University with a BA in Criminology and Sociology. I believe that I possess a diverse background and experience, including child welfare, social and civil services, youth and community development, including intake and investigations. I am very much a product of Columbus, Ohio. I grew up attending Columbus City Schools and was a very active youth in the Columbus Parks and Recreation, I truly believe Columbus is a great city, and as a mom, it is a community that I am proud to raise my family in. I truly believe in the mission set forth before the board as well as Department of Inspector General, and I'm proud to be a part and to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Board. Let's save the best for last. My name is Wiley Woodard. I'm born and raised here in Columbus, Ohio. Attended the Ohio State University, and also have my master's from Franklin University as well. I have 16 years of experience in federal investigations. I started out in Washington, D.C. After I graduated from Ohio State. I decided to come back here to Columbus after 6 years of being there to get my master's degree from Franklin, and decided to stay here, and that's where I got my MBA. I'm just happy to be a part of this organization and look to grow with them. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. You can stand up.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Stephanie Brock. I'm the new executive assistant to the board. Pleasure to be here. I have over 30 years of administrative experience. It started when I was 18, and I volunteered with Mr. Stokes when the development area was first brought to the city. I've been with the City of Columbus for over 10 years. I was recently an assistant to the director in the Recreation and Parks Department, so I'm very versed in the commission meetings. We have monthly commission meetings, so I'm very versed in that. I've worked with the Columbus City Schools, so actually all my life has been in the public sector. So I'm honored to be here, and I'm hoping to help us get moving and get on track. Okay, have a good one.
Thank you so much for allowing me to introduce my team, and as you can see, I'm very excited that you can see just the diversity, the experience that we have, and hopefully the team will be very proud of all the investigations that we do and bring to you. So thank you.
Question. Thanks so much for both the presentation and also the chance to meet the team. It's hard to believe that it's been over a year at this point. And so I just wanted to thank you and the entire department for the work. You know, one of the questions too is, as you know, a question that comes to mind is we see a lot of new team members, especially knowing the capacity point, but also the grind it takes to do this amount of investigations, knowing that there's been some turnover. really thinking through how can we as a board, as a city, provide the types of support that's needed, because trying to get a sense of what that year-over-year turnover might look like versus, there might be, there's a variety of reasons that people might leave an office, but thinking about so that we can address some of those issues up front. We're excited to have the new team, and of course we have some remaining members as well with the IG's office, but wanted to get some insight on thinking about what that strategy over the long term is, so that a year from now we're able to have folks that are part of the team, and what can we do to support the grind that is, so it's not that your office is over capacity or overrun. So I just want to get an insight on what that might look like and how you're thinking about that as you move forward for the future.
Well, thank you so much, and I'm so glad that you asked the question. Because now that we've been in operation for a year, it gives me totals. So it allows me to look, and that's the main thing that I've been looking at, growing the office. And as you can see, we have additional people. Some people, we've had a couple people, one left, just decided that it was not a good fit for them, and that's fine. And then I'd like to say, CPD poached one of my good investigators. But one thing I will say going forward is building out. My goal is to, when we're doing a new budget, is to really increase. I'd like to get 2 more investigators on. I'd like to have another supervisor, which I didn't. I don't know if you knew that Scott is our supervisor. He's one of our original. He's also one of the supervisor and has really been working really good to train people. I want to have another supervisor. As you can see, just the amount of intake we had was just so much. A lot of the investigators handle the intake without doing the follow-up. We actually work with the civil service to go out there and create another position. So now we have an IG intake specialist. That's vacant right now, but that will be filled. That's going to give me 2 people that are going to be strictly dedicated to handling that input of all of those inputs, complaints that are coming in, and that will be filtered to the investigators. Also allowing me to create a budget and a salary that will sustain and be very competitive to keeping the investigators, because obviously we know pay becomes a really big factor. We get, as you can see, very qualified people. We want to be able to keep them, and so that's one of the things that I do plan on working on with the budget, is making sure that the salaries and stuff are competitive as we're growing the office.
Okay. Well, any way that we can support in terms of what those budget requests look like, let us know. We want to make sure you guys are fully staffed and ready to go, and at least I know personally that I'm in support of that, and hopefully anything we can do to make that happen. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Any Inspector General?
Just one quick. Do you have an average number of cases each investigator had over the year?
Yes, based on, so we average based on that total. Now, some of the investigators, we went through a transition in April where we ended up having one investigator that resigned because they went to another agency. One investigator we ended up letting go. So the average caseload at that point turned out to be an average of anywhere from 4 cases per investigator per month. And so while that, again, I say sometimes it sounds like a small total, it's a lot of work that goes in, which is one of the reasons we're looking at what the total is for the year and building it out and bringing in enough investigative staff to have that in place so that we can do a thorough investigation. Again, with the fact that we're learning more and more systems and have more and more access to systems. Because the first thing I will say is that trying to get those investigations done in 90 days is a lot, which will be one of the reasons why when we are following up on the complaints, we only give up to 2 weeks to follow up. If we don't get any follow-up information or the complainant doesn't call us back within 2 weeks, we close the case, because that's 2 weeks that's taken away that the investigators are going to need when they're looking at investigations. So, but thank you. But that's kind of what the average is right now.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have an average time for kind of when these, from open to close, when these cases are? Do you all have that information in terms of kind of the averages across all these cases?
I don't have a average time. We're probably, well, I can say we don't keep track of the time. I can say initially when up until April, when we first got the cases, most of the cases, because they vary on the type of case you have, some cases don't require a lot of information, so they're closed a little bit faster. Some of the cases like we might have, like the Amber Alert and some other cases, they just take more longer. We have some cases that, for example, may involve an allegation that involved a raid. So if it involves some type of raid with SWAT, that's going to take a little bit longer because they may be looking at body cam for 10 or 12 officers. So I will say it just really varies. But what I will tell you is up until April, when we had the shift in our staff, we had been completing our investigations within 90 days. We hadn't had to ask for any extension. Because we went through a transition of not having enough staff, it took time to hire. So now we did have to do some extensions on some of our requests to get additional 30 days to help us complete our investigations. But we're still aggressively getting everything done, and we have not ran into any issues with the extensions that we've asked for the FOP. And with the new staff coming in, they have been great with just jumping in, reviewing the information. Scott has really been working with them. So I kind of envision as time goes on that we'll get back into that time frame where we were, which was getting most of our investigations completed in 90 days on average, unless it was something that was kind of extraordinary where we had a lot of footage or a lot of documents that we were going through.
And that's helpful. And I think, and I know when we and you all put the time period on each of these investigation memos, and maybe your office doesn't have the capacity right now, or maybe, but whether it's an additional city agency to help provide the support to get all those cases together, to then kind of what is the average time frame that it takes? Because what I will say is that you all do them pretty quickly, especially comparatively to a lot of agencies all across the country. This is done well and done in a great timeline to make sure it's done in 90 days. With that said, really making sure that we're providing the support so that we can get a sense of, well, what is, I know you talked about some specific cases might be much longer than others, but what is kind of the general average, for example, this action's taken, not taken, or certain cases where you're getting an overwhelming amount, what's the general timeline, so that, one, not only do we have a sense of that timeline, but then members of the public will get a sense of, like, there's a whole process this goes through. The reason why I think that's so important is because, yes, we have the 90-day frame, but also to Board Member Nathan's point, we are still waiting to hear back on the disposition on a particular set of cases that are already closed to see what the process has been through CPD and the police chief. And these are on some cases that have been closed 10 months ago. And so, while that process, I think that the timing is important, what you all are working on, and we have to get a sense as well on when are we going to understand the outcomes of what we're recommending. And so, and that's out of your hands. I get that. But that's why I'm not too pressed about how fast you're doing this, because I think you guys are doing it quickly.
Well, thank you so much, and we appreciate it. And again, we can get that for you. I just will say, when we look at the total picture, sometimes what can make a case go long, and so we try to do our due diligence, is getting in touch with the complainant. Sometimes the complainant does not always call us back. Then by the time they do call us back, if they're providing information, that can take long. The thing I will say that really does help curve that time frame now is the fact that we have access to the body cam. We have access now with CAD. We actually have access to CAD, whereas before we would submit a request, and so we would have to wait for that request to come in with that information. We have a lot more access to pull that information. Same thing when it comes to policy and procedure. And I will say the biggest lag time, and Scott, you can let me know if I'm wrong, is really sometimes trying to interview the officers, because officers are sometimes on vacation, sometimes they're trying to contact the FOP rep in which to be there. And I think at one point there was only a couple or maybe 2 or 3 reps that was really sitting in the beginning of the process. So we understand in the beginning, a lot of people are learning and trying to work through the dynamics. But now I believe the FOP has trained some more reps, so there's some more reps that are present. So some of those really played a role in the time frame. It may not necessarily have been the investigator doing the investigation, but some of all the different pieces that play a part in being a part of that investigation sometimes affects the timeline. But what I can tell you is we do meet biweekly. I know Scott meets with the team weekly, and so we are really aggressively on them to see what they're doing. And what I will say, if at any point in time, if the board would like to say, well, you know, what is the process or how long? We do have case notes. So the investigators do go into the system, and if they request something and they're waiting, they're supposed to go in there and put their case notes in there. So it's like if somebody was to call me and say, hey, you know, why it took so long or what's the process, I can actually go into CMS and say, okay, oh, I saw they talked to this person, they reached back out, they were supposed to contact, they didn't. But it's just a lot of different pieces that will affect the timeline. But again, you know, our goal really is to be efficient and to try to get these cases done as fast as possible. And not just because we want to be fast, but because we just want to be efficient, because there's always complaints coming in. There's always cases coming in. And so we just don't want to just wait on something just because we have the time to wait on it.
Thank you for that. All right, next up on our agenda is a draft discipline policy that was submitted by the Rules and Regulations Subcommittee. That committee met in June, and then this draft was attached to your meeting materials. Has everyone had an opportunity to review it?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I'd like to open up the floor now for any additional discussion about, are there aspects that you think need to be added? Yes, Mark.
Chair, the only thing that I seen, I don't see anything in here where if there is a complaint or an issue, that the person is notified. So
Okay.
if I, you know, per se have a complaint, I most certainly would like to know that before, you know, and I don't get surprised. Other than that, I think it's great.
I agree with that point. An additional comment I would have is the bottom of the first page. Oh, hold on. The bottom of the first page, it says, the last sentence, at the close of executive session, the emergency board meeting will recommence and a motion can be made pertaining to any potential recommended removal. I would just request in adding in the language discipline or removal or removal, just because I want to be clear that removal is not the only option in this particular instance. It could be discipline, some other sort of discipline, which we've kind of talked about before, of us not necessarily jumping to removal.
Okay.
Would that be necessary as well to amend the first sentence?
I think I don't know if we can, because that's.
So that's specifically, yeah, so that is citing specifically to the authority under 23501.
But the second sentence gets to, I think they've got it there too.
Yeah.
Oh, just,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay.
I'd maybe say and/or, but that's a.
Gotcha, yep. Any other suggestions? And I'll read them all out after everyone is weighed in.
So we haven't, and I don't know if it needs to be in this process or if there's an idea on some sort of progressive discipline policy. Like, I don't think it needs to be included here, but I'm assuming there's language either the city uses or others related to language around progressive discipline. But I don't know if that's something that needs to be included here or elsewhere, but that is something that I did want to indicate and put in writing somewhere that, you know, we have some sort of process.
Do you have any suggestions for what that progressive discipline language would be?
You could have, maybe it's like an IE language, like you could say removal from subcommittees or not reviewing particular case, whatever, like some steps that are not just immediate removal. Like what is that in between action?
Yeah, there's public reprimands, there's, a probation and a request for, a change of posture, behavior, all the way to removal. So there are multiple disciplinary steps that could be taken.
But wouldn't that be based upon the offense itself?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, because we got to make sure we put that type of language in there if you're going to do that, based upon the offense.
I'm going to say to run it past me after
Yeah.
you've got a draft. The concern I have is applying it consistently. If you start doing progressive discipline, you could have, not that this is going to come up all the time, hopefully it's minimal that you're going to have to move to remove somebody, but, somebody could come back and say, well, that person did this and only got this, only got a public reprimand, and now I'm getting forwarded to the mayor for removal. So, consistency in application is always probably best, but, maybe consider leaving it as, if you've engaged in behavior that could qualify under the statute, neglect, malfeasance, the remedy is a recommendation of removal, period.
Yeah, I think that's I'm trying to figure out the balance though, because I agree with the consistency in application, and I think that there are certain instances that rise to the level of they should be removed. I think the challenge that I have is that there can be an in-between of this person doesn't necessarily need to be removed from the board, but we shouldn't not do anything about it either. And so I don't know if that
Well,
exists.
that would be where you have healthy discourse and discussion, and it's, 2/3 vote. Is significant in terms of you need that for recommendation of removal, so.
Okay. Well, and just based on my knowledge of just laying forth how we might operate in these circumstances, I do think it would be helpful in writing to talk about additional options and have that in writing just so that folks see that there are additional options available. But I agree to the point around consistency and application. And so we'll certainly, if we add that piece in, run that by council and the entire team. So that's not an issue moving forward.
I definitely have that concern coming from the collective bargaining world. Believe me, consistency is very important. Second of all, does the statute allow us to do that, or does that come from the mayor or city council?
Well, right, so, the statute only calls for the vote to recommend removal. There's no language in there, at least that I'm not familiar with, that talks about any kind of discipline or progressive discipline. You mentioned, when you deal with the progressive discipline issue with the police, there's a bargaining agreement. Here, you're appointed to the board, mayor, concurrence of council, and you also are signing an ethical pledge as well. So you kind of come into it with eyes wide open as to what the ramifications can be if you are found to have engaged in behavior that qualifies under the statute for a recommendation of removal.
I think progressive discipline might lead to a quagmire, because what does that look like in reality? Does it mean that the individual can't vote? Does it mean that the individual can't review cases? And how much time would we as a board take to come to this realization and to this conclusion, and how much time does it take away from our duties? I think what we have set up, and what Mr. Tobias indicated, that, we're going to deal with removal, and in dealing with removal, we're going to debate it, and then a 2/3 vote, and that's enough there, I think. I mean, of course, that's just my opinion, but we need to watch this gradation of discipline, because that might lead into taking a lot of time away from what our real role is here.
Well, I do think it's respectful. I do think it's helpful to have additional options in writing, so that it's not, you're just, I think it's a helpful opportunity so that there are steps that you can take that does not automatically mean removal. That's kind of what the board did previously, when this situation was ongoing, when we had a past situation of a past member was ongoing, that they still had the opportunity potentially to be heard in front of the mayor or city council. But while that process was happening, they were still technically on the board. The chair at the time made the decision to just remove that member from case reviews. That was a decision that was perfectly within authority. I think it's just helpful to have more stuff in writing as you have newer members come on board, so that there are options available to us. But of course, we have counsel to work through to think about the potential pitfalls of not having consistent application to certain things. The argument also can go into somebody got removed for X, but isn't getting removed for Y. Why is that? So I think it's just helpful to have additional options on the table. I agree with consistency and application, and of course it's different than the collective bargaining, but I do think the values of a board that we're trying to put forth is that we have some sort of process that isn't necessarily automatic removal. So that would just be my recommendation for that, just to have some language, not to bind us. As far as what those policy or those discipline steps can be, it would be additional steps that member Nathan spoke to. It wouldn't be the steps about not voting or anything like that, because that would be a violation more broadly. I'm pretty sure a violation of the charter more broadly, but there are other probationary steps we can take, like not reviewing cases or certain aspects of that.
But wouldn't that be open to discussion?
Yeah, of course.
When we're having our discussion, because to me, if we start getting into a whole bunch of these rules, adding more rules and regulations, then we're really diluting ourselves, because now what does the 2/3 vote mean?
Well, look, I mean, I think it's helpful to build a foundation for future boards and future board members to have language and potential precedent and examples, so that they don't just have to, because these things are happening. I mean, these discussions are happening in executive session, right? And so many of these discussions in particular are not open to the public. And so, again, we can speak to particular past examples to indicate why we might want to have language that highlights out steps we can take. It doesn't mean we can't remove people. Like, of course we can, but I do think it's helpful to have some stuff in writing while we're doing a process here. And the whole idea behind this draft is to provide additional guidance, because you've got the clause there, the ordinance about removal, but this walks through more detailed steps, and I think this is a perfect example of adding that to the case.
Go ahead, Doc.
Well, I was going to say, I do think that the draft looks good, and I do have some concerns, because at the end of the day, we still voted. We gave a 2/3 vote for that last situation that you have referenced, and so everybody was pretty much, the majority was in agreement that removal should happen. My concern with additional discipline, if we list out options, is we start to get into subjectivity, but then it also leaves the opportunity for an individual, for whatever reason, they may get on the board and they may decide, oh, I'm going to go ahead and do this. I might engage in this, and I really don't have anything to worry about, because I might just be removed from a couple of cases. And so that might serve as some kind of incentive. Whereas if we have removal, that's more of a serious reprimand that takes place. And so a person might think twice about engaging in whatever activities that may be out of our code of ethics or not in alignment with our code of ethics. And so I just think we need to consider that also as we're considering the discipline. But the biggest thing is, if we list out, okay, you're removed from 2 cases, you're removed from 3 cases, you might be suspended for 2 months. How are we going to apply that? And who's going to be responsible for managing and ensuring that there is some consistency across the board? Because our attorneys are already busy doing their other regular jobs, and we're all busy as well. So I just think we need to think about all of that.
I would also remind the board that we're all a group of volunteers.
There you go.
So, it's something, and I appreciate what Kyle's trying to say, but I'm here as a volunteer. Discipline and getting disciplined would be a challenge for me as a volunteer.
I want to bring up one other thing, too, before we move forward. The other thing is, we keep on talking about removal, but there's nothing to say that we're going to come back with a vote that says to remove someone. You know, there's nothing that says we're going to come back with a vote, always come back with a vote to remove someone. We need to look over the facts, and the facts will determine whether this individual deserves this, deserves that, blah, blah, blah. But when we start getting bogged down with a bunch of alternatives and rules, I agree with Doc, you know, we're going to find ourselves in this great big quagmire where we got to find somebody that's going to oversee this. We got to make sure that it's legal to do these things, and then we're asking for some other problems.
Yeah.
And I think what we did with the last situation that we had, when we were in that room for that 2 hours, we did what I
due
believe.
diligence.
Exactly. We did what I think you wanted to do, and we're all intelligent enough to do that. And this covers, I think, what we need to do without adding all of the other paraphernalia that I don't think that we necessarily need. I think we're good here.
I don't think it's paraphernalia, but I will say that in this particular instance, I don't think it's all that complicated. I really don't. I think we could add a couple of, some examples here and run that by council as some potential options. Again, as to your point around conduct, there's a difference between inefficient, neglect of duty, or an act of malfeasance as well. So yes, we'd make that determination on it. The reason why I think it's important to publicly to communicate this as a board and put it in writing is so that decisions aren't just made unilaterally. There's not unilateral decisions. So for example here, if there's an idea that somebody doesn't get removed, but then the chair or somebody else feels like, well, they didn't need to get removed, but something should happen here in this instance. Instead of that person, that chair, just making the decision, well, they're just not going to be on the sub-review committee, there's at least something they can point to. It wasn't like, I just made this decision. It was, well, given the circumstances, this seems to be an appropriate route to take, and that is an option that we've done before or that we're going to consider. So I'm not trying to bind us to anything, but I would like to put some stuff in writing so that we have language around this. It doesn't force our hands on this, but it makes it just practice. I mean, just more part of the standard practice. So was going to recommend a few, some options around that. That's all. It wasn't supposed to be super complicated, but I just wanted to put that out there for folks. Or at least have it on the record that I've indicated that we should put stuff in writing so that it's not just decisions are made behind closed doors during our executive session.
So I believe when we had initially talked about that, we discussed the process being one thing and then the additional disciplinary actions being something separate. And so I'm wondering if, just to even consider what you're proposing, perhaps you or somebody else, a couple people convene a group to create what those additional disciplinary options would be so that we will have something to go off of. Because right now, we're all thinking different things, right? Suspended I'm thinking suspension for me, but I'm hearing, removal from cases. I'm hearing, public reprimands and different things like that. And so I think it would help if we have something concrete to look at to then discuss to move forward. But that would be separate from this draft that focuses on the process.
That's fine with me.
And I would like a clarification that we even have the ability to do so under the statute before we even go into the process.
Okay, so it sounds like I'm going to do two separate things. One, get consensus on at least 3 edits, that we have a notification timeline for the person against whom an allegation is made, added before the convening. Mark, does that sound right? Okay. 2, the last sentence on page 1, add in discipline or removal. 3, add the word or between discipline and removal at the second sentence at the top. Is everyone at least in agreement on those edits?
Yes.
Okay. So with those, let's keep that. Yeah.
Just to ask a point of clarification, I'm hearing everybody say yes, and yet I was hearing you say, I don't want other options, I want removal. So just could you help me with the yes on the discipline or removal?
I was going to get to that because Dr. Jones had suggested 2 separate things, having a process and then having allowable discipline. I'm going to get.
They just want a discipline without a process. Is that
Having a separate document that has discipline options.
Correct.
that are not part of the procedure for discipline. So like this would be a timeline, nuts and bolts, here's what you do. Separate document that says, here are the permissible disciplines that fall short of removal. So that was going to be my second thing, was saying, if we have these two issues in front of us, my plan is to I'm going to make two different motions, or at least open up the floor for two separate motions.
Sure, I'm just curious, when you said yes to discipline or removal, what I was hearing, I'm just asking, what I was hearing was no. What I want is clarity. We'll either vote to remove in a case that we believe is egregious. We're intelligent people. We need to reach a standard of 2/3. And if not, then that's it. They stay on the board. Or we remove, one or the other. That's what I was hearing from you guys, from this group over here. And I'm just trying to clarify. I'm not trying to corner you or anything. I'm just trying to say, but then when we said discipline or removal, then I heard, yes, that's good, and then we'll create a process. So are you open to discipline or removal so long as the language gets clarified and it's statutorily acceptable? Or are you saying, no, I really don't want to even go down that path. I want it to be removal or nothing?
I think, I don't want to answer for this group since you pointed them out, but I think the issue was getting clarification on what we are permissibly allowed to do first, which that would come from Mr. Tobias. And then that would then determine the discipline added to, yes.
But we're
then
voting right
impact-
now to amend this to discipline or removal, and that if we don't get the clarification, we ought not to be voting on discipline or removal. We should just say, leave it as it is until we get the clarification, and then we'll decide to add or amend this to discipline or removal. Unless
Well, I think that's
there's-
right,
but
don't we
even
have
in-
clarification? We can do this, right? I mean,
Well, even in the document, though, there's some inconsistency, because in the first paragraph, it says discipline and removal, and then in the last paragraph, it just says removal. So there's
I know.
inconsistency
And
there.
that's what Kyle was saying before.
There's a few different provisions. There's one provision in the charter that says, subject to the approval of council, the Civilian Police Review Board shall make rules providing for the procedure of the board and for the review of complaints. So there's some interpretation around what it means, rules providing for the procedure of the board. I think that's more in line with reviewing complaints, not disciplining its own members. And then in the statute, in 235, there's a talk about the board in consultation with the city attorney's office developing standards of professional conduct, policies pertaining to board membership. So again, that's in consultation with the city attorney's office. You have some general sense of what my advice would be in relation to what's being discussed. And then there's an additional language in the, let's see here. Yeah, there was additional language in here as well, talking about policies and procedures. So, I mean, again, off the cuff today at the meeting without looking into it further, I'd say don't do it. I'd say leave it as it's written in the statute in regards to the standards for removal and with a 2/3 vote. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. And I would probably want to look into it a little bit more as to whether this would fall under, standards of professional conduct or rulemaking authority in terms of whether there should be any provisions related to progressive discipline in your policy, your rules and regs policies.
that's all. I mean, so if that's the case, I mean, should we hold on this entire draft? Because I think even the extra language is also extra language around this that.
I mean, thankfully, you're meeting next week, so I'll be perfectly prepared to walk in here next
Okay.
Tuesday and give you my firmer advice.
Perfect.
For sure.
I'm in favor of that.
I'm good.
Okay, that'll be helpful. Thank you, Mr. Tobias.
Sure.
All right, moving next to case reviews. Before we get to cases that were assigned in June, we still have a few cases left over from Mr. Strickland's Review Subcommittee. We can start with those, and then we'll move on to administrative closures, cases with which the subcommittees agree and cases with which the subcommittees disagree for June.
Is this 154?
Yes, 154 and then 0556, looks like, up until 076.
Well, this is 154. This was the one that I don't know if there's an update from the Inspector General's office, but this was the one where we recommended, we wanted to hold and have further discussion about to look into this. This was the case, as a reminder, that a CPD officer was on guard duty with a patient under arrest at Grant Medical Center. The complainant alleged that an officer showed a nurse a video that had been posted on YouTube of the patient being shot. He alleged that the nurse believed the video was too loud and the officer showing the video too close in proximity to the patient. The nurse indicated it was inappropriate as the patient had just gone through a traumatic experience and shouldn't have to relive it. It was further alleged that the call button was moved across the room and away from the patient, which the nurse believed was unsafe. The Inspector General reviewed this, investigated and followed up with a statement from the nurse, and also interviewed both officers that were assigned to guard duty for this assignment. And the recommendation in this case was that both allegations be closed with a finding of exonerated. However, our review committee, we disagreed with that particular recommendation regarding allegation 1. And allegation 1 in this case was the officer showing a complainant a YouTube video of the patient being shot, which he believed was inappropriate. And so our committee felt that those actions seemed to rise to the level of misconduct, and so we recommend that allegation 1 be sustained. And the allegation 2, we agreed with that finding of exonerated in that situation, but that was our recommendation. From there, based on the conversation we had, we could either make the decision to just disagree with the IG's office or have further investigation into this process. But we kind of left it there towards the end of that last meeting. And so I don't know if there's additional follow-up or what we should do as it relates to that. And the reason I say this is because, again, we're doing all these cases and we still have not heard, what happens from CPD or the police chief and the process for when we make a decision. And so I just want to make sure that we aren't in a situation where, something's referenced in the IG's report of exonerated, and then we make a recommendation of sustained. And, I don't know how that, how the CPD takes that then in terms of their consideration of reviewing our particular case. And so that's where I wanted to kind of open that question up in terms of whether there's follow-up from the IG's office or whether we want to move ahead anyway, even if there's continued disagreement language here with the IG's office.
We did, thank you so much to the chair. We did look at the case, and what we did was trying to look at some other policies that would dictate the officer's actions while they're on duty. There is no other policy, and the officer's actions did not violate a policy, which is why, our findings was that it was exonerated. And what I will tell you is anytime there's findings that the board has that's different than the IG's, that is attached to the report, and it does go over to the it is turned over and it goes to the chief. And this is still a process because the chief, when the reports go over, they go through the chain of command. The chain of command will look at the investigations. Again, they look at their policy and procedure, and they'll either come back and say that they either confer or not confer, and they quote whatever policy and procedure they feel is a violation. There's still a process, so we don't really know what the finding is on a lot of things that will be done, which is why I haven't had a chance to report that to the board. But for us, we did not find a policy in which the officer's actions would have violated. So for us, we would still stand with the fact that we did not find that his actions violated a CPD policy.
So this wouldn't be misconduct of any sort or violation of police rule? Because I guess at what level do the same actions, could the same actions be determined to rise to the level of misconduct? It's, that's where I'm kind of trying to get an understanding of, in this instance, officer shows a video of,
What did you base this on, the Rule 2? Or what?
Well, that was what we were trying to figure out, but and whether or not this, this is a violation of one of the rules, and what we're hearing here is that you all could not necessarily determine that this would be a particular violation of misconduct or something of that level, and I was just trying to get some more details as to how, in this instance, showing a video to, somebody who felt that it was inappropriate with the victim nearby doesn't rise to some sort of level of misconduct. That was just the question that we had, because it seems to rise to that level. And so what were the determinations that went into it? Because that seems like it could be a relatively subjective interpretation of it. It seems to be, which is again why trying to get a sense of how CPD would handle a particular instance in this case.
Well, I think, and the investigator is actually here, so he could speak on it, but I believe the issue was that when the officer showed the video to the nurse, she never said that she was offended. Had she, he showed her the video and she said, I don't want to show this, I'm offended, and the officer proceeded to do that, then we can take some action. The officer, based on the investigation, showed the person, and they admitted that they didn't say anything. They filed the complaint afterwards, saying that they felt that, him showing the video.
And thank you for that. I'll speak to that a little bit. I mean, I do think that the notion that they may not have said it was inappropriate, but they did file a complaint, or somebody filed a complaint, and, whatever the dynamics may be for somebody, they feel like they can tell somebody who's in uniform, here's what I'm showing you, whether or not they feel that's inappropriate in the moment. The process here exists to provide people the opportunity, if they feel that there's a violation, to file a complaint. And in this particular instance, they've indicated that they were inappropriate. So the notion of whether or not that individual said this is inappropriate, to me, I don't think is dispositive as to the actual conduct of showing a video. Whether, even the person's like, oh, great, thanks for showing me the video. Whether or not that happens, the fact is that, which they didn't, they felt it was inappropriate. And on top of it, just the action of showing a video of somebody being shot and they're right over there seems to be some sort of violation. And if it is not a violation, if there's not a policy that exists, it would be my recommendation that there is some sort of policy to address this situation, because I don't think we want to have a practice in which folks are able to walk around and show videos of people getting shot and saying there's no sort of misconduct for that. So that is just my thought. And so I believe that this rises to the level of misconduct. And then Pastor Tatum, go for it.
I have an issue with the fact, if nothing else, is this representative of what we want our police force to be about? To where they have jocularity, where they want to show, just because this person may have committed an offense, still is a human being. And then we're so inhumane that we're going to sit there and show a video to somebody, and probably real loud about it, of an individual being shot. And I have problems with that. And I don't care whether there's a policy or not. We need to have a policy developed to deal with that, because to me it seems like general rules should say, you shouldn't do stuff like that. That'd be like me as a pastor, somebody telling me, their personal, most shameful business, and I'm sitting up there having a conversation with you about it, and they're right over there. And to me, that's just that's terrible. That's just downright terrible.
Question, because I don't know all the details of the case, but I'm curious, and y'all just go with me here. But I'm curious to know, was there a particular reason why the officer showed the video to the nurse? Because I was wondering, the nurse works in the medical field, the victim is over there. Was the officer trying to say, hey, this is what happened, this is how the bullet entered, this is where it perhaps exited? And what was his disposition? Was it joking like, hey, look here, this is what happened, or was it serious? The other thing I'm curious about is, and it goes to why the nurse may have provided the report after the fact, is because it's a police officer. An officer is in a position of authority. So if they say, here's the video, look at this, most people are going to listen to what that officer says. And so even if it makes them feel a little uncomfortable, which probably then goes to why the report may have been filed after the fact. But I am just curious for, perhaps if you did an interview or something like that, was there any type of explanation as to why? Because, I mean, it is a nurse. So, I sit on the board at Grant. I know sometimes they want that information, so that's why I'm curious to know.
Yes, ma'am. To answer that question, the officer did talk about that in his statement, not as succinctly as you put it. Essentially, his reasoning for showing the nurse that video was he wanted to show her the circumstances surrounding the incident that had him in the hospital in the first place, why the officers were there. That was the reason he provided for showing that video. I think the other thing, too, is that when we interpret these policies and in the findings that we have, I think we have a little less latitude than the board does in these discussions when we're making those recommendations. That's not to say that in any case that we put out, whether we write that a person is exonerated or it's an unfounded case or a sustained case, that we necessarily agree with any of that information personally. That's just what we find and what we've interpreted through the policies. And again, just to Board Member Strickland's point, I do think that you guys do have more of that latitude to kind of interpret these things. So the findings that we have are based very, very directly on the literal interpretations of these policies. And, to the point that you made earlier, nobody in our office would be offended if you were to disagree with anything that we wrote. This is just the findings that we have based on the literal interpretation of what we've been able to uncover.
Thank you, Mr. Hurler. And I was just going to interject and say, very similarly, even if the IG report states no policy was violated, that doesn't stop the subcommittee or the whole board from making a recommendation, whether it be for additional training or discipline or whatever our recommendation would be for the officer involved here.
So, Mr. Hurler, so this was not an ha-ha moment for the officer from your evaluation?
No, ma'am.
And the nurse, did she have an understanding of what was going on here, of why the officer was showing her, I mean, from what you gathered?
She didn't say that she had the same understanding as the officer gave me. She did tell me when I did the statement with her, she did not stop him from showing the video. She didn't interject or say anything about the video being loud or that it wasn't inappropriate in any way. So she didn't indicate one way or the other. She also didn't indicate one way or another whether she understood that after the fact, what the officer's intent was showing her the video.
I would like just to have a point of clarification, not about the substance of this case, but rather what the police chief receives when they receive a disagreement between the board and the IG's office. So, just sitting here thinking about it, it seems like we could go in two directions. One direction is the IG works for the board. We're your supervisors. So even though you disagree with us, we win. And as a result of that, you ought to substitute our decision for your decision and rewrite your report to conform to the board's decision. So that would be one approach. Okay, let me finish. The second approach would be so that there's a consistency in finding, given that we're the oversight committee. The second approach would be that, no, You've made your finding. The board disagreed. The police chief receives that. The downside of that would be that that does have, at least for any human being, seeing a disagreement, they're already in the position of, they're the police chief overseeing the police. That has a tendency to diminish the board's recommendation for any human being looking at it. So I'm just trying to see what the ups and downs of the two approaches would be. So, Mr. Tobias?
Yeah, I don't believe you have the authority to replace your decision for the IG's decision. I think in the year that I've been listening in on these, the number of times you've disagreed with the IG's findings has been far and few between. And in those particular instances, it's just noted and recorded that there's disagreement, and it'll be forwarded to the chief of police or the director of public safety with all the information. It's all public record anyway.
But what about the diminishing of our finding?
Well,
of
I
our
don't think,
recommendation?
I would disagree with the categorization as it being diminished. It's just a difference of opinion, and it's your authority to disagree with the IG's finding if you so choose, but all of the information needs to be forwarded to the chief of police.
And could you just speak a little further? My understanding of our relationship is different than your understanding. So help me to know why that's the case. Does the IG report to this board?
I would say yes, the IG does report to the board.
And what is the nature, help us as a board to understand, just how this relationship works.
Well, right, I mean, I'd have to pull all the statutes and review all the language in there to kind of provide you with, a more solid, explanation. But I'm just going to say that based on my understanding of the way that the charter reads and the way that the statute reads and all your rules and regs, you can't say we disagree with you, we're going to vote against you, and then only our recommendation is going to get forwarded to the chief of police.
I also would not advise the IG to make a change in her finding based on a recommendation from a board that did not conduct the investigation. So you all do not have the power to investigate complaints. You don't have that power pursuant to charter nor pursuant to rule. She is the only body that has the power to investigate. She has the responsibility to report to you what the findings of her investigation is. You have the ability to agree or disagree. I think it's inevitable that if there is a disagreement that there may be some prejudicial effect, but the chain of command will always have to have another disciplinary hearing before discipline is wrought to an officer, which gives that officer due process to make sure that the folks that are determining the discipline are impartial and looking at all sides of the story. So it's not an end-all be-all from the board to discipline. There is still another level of due process that occurs after a recommendation from the board is given to the chain of command.
And when you
Tosh had his hand up about 4 minutes ago.
What I was going to ask is, we're asking questions about the chief and the chain of command. Can we just invite her here and ask her those questions?
I mean, these are all fair questions. I mean, we're sitting here making recommendations left and right for the last, 10 months. For a while, we've been making these recommendations. No clue what is happening with these recommendations. So I really don't even know why we're making recommendations with not, we don't have all the information, right? So I think this is helpful in terms of with the, getting all the findings and what the finding looks like moving forward. But if I'm in a position, if you're talking about the police chief or CBD, if you're looking at this, the idea is, well, the IG's office did the full investigation. They looked through all the facts and findings, and then you have a board of volunteers who came in and said, we disagree with the findings. Thanks, that's nice. Thanks for letting us know. But I don't know how much weight we're going to add to that. And on top of it is, well, we're going to do our own investigation process anyway. We're going to go through our own process. How much weight generally is given to the IG's office in terms of the investigation that you went through? And so without having insight on how you're finding, like, you know, we obviously provide a tremendous amount of deference to the findings because we know your entire team looks through this, does a full investigation, full and thorough impartial investigation. Then the process goes to the police chief and CPD. But from there, I don't know how much weight is being taken from that process at all, and what impact it has on the final disposition whatsoever. And so that's kind of where I'm a little concerned by in terms of where this is ultimately going, or are we just kind of in a course of just saying things that may not have any outcome whatsoever? And so that's just my concern more broadly.
I think one thing, remember, we will not know yet because of how new our office is. And so while I understand the frustration with not knowing outcomes yet, we also cannot hit a standstill and not continue to do our work because we don't know those outcomes yet. Because at the end of the day, regardless of what happens, do we think that some other policy needs to be enacted? Or do we think that some discipline should happen, even if at this moment we can't tell whether the chief is ultimately going to accept that and do that? I think that's part of just where we are in this process. I think if you believe that we should change our behavior based on what those outcomes might be, I think that's looking far afield from what the content of the complaint is, and is instead trying to crystal ball the ending to justify what our recommendation is. I think we can recommend, we think this should be a policy, or we think this policy needs to be revised, and we can send that forward. But even know that even this action now in July, on this particular case, we might not understand or know what the outcome of that is for, until a year from now, which is a little outside our board's control.
I mean, so maybe that's where there's an attention to policy change and how we're doing this process. I mean, the fact is that we're just taking these cases in, reviewing them every month, not having deep conversations about policy change whatsoever. We are just reviewing these cases, coming in. People who filed complaints 10 months ago, they get a response from the IG's office of what the findings were, but any other follow-up from that, you probably won't know, and you may not even ever know, right? I mean, you may not ever know. So why don't we just, to me, without knowing that information, because I was fine with us kind of doing this as we were kind of going through the process, but now a year later and we still aren't hearing back what's happening, I don't think we're doing justice to those who are going through the complaint process when we're just making decisions without having any insight on what is actually happening to somebody's particular case. Why the rush then of trying to rush through these cases if the complainant has already received a finding from the IG's office that has been forwarded to the police chief?
I don't know that we're rushing. And just to be clear, the office has been open for a year, but our first set of cases that we actually took a look at and then forwarded on to the chief of police or director of public safety happened, maybe November, December, or January? So it has not been a year since we approved and made recommendations to the chief. It's been close to 7 months. So just for that piece of clarity, and while I agree that I would love to see some results back, and if I remember correctly, right after our last meeting, I think we didn't we get back two? I think the very first two might have come back, because I thought the Deputy Director Blunt said that a couple results had come back, but it was only maybe 2 cases. And so we haven't heard those report outs yet. But just to say this, I think we can absolutely have policy discussions. I don't know that we are going to get a change in what the chief and director of public safety policy is like. And so to that extent, we can talk till we're blue in the face, but I don't believe that unless we are talking about changing the FOP contract and modifying it to get a response time, because right now the only strictures we have on timing are the duty for a person to file a complaint within 90 days, the IG's office to get those done in 90 days, but there's nothing else requiring the chief or director of public safety to then return that back to us within a certain time frame. And so to that extent, I think that's a contract thing that we at this table are going to have to, we're not going to be able to control that. Board Member Vicente and then IG Hendricks, please.
Yes, thank you. As one of the newest board members right here, one of the purposes that I remember that the board was formed is to basically the actions of the police officers taking against citizens, right? And maybe in this case it's not a violation on any policy or procedure, but clearly someone who has trained in working in trauma base, maybe the actions of the police officer was inappropriate. So I think that we need to review the inappropriateness of the police officers showing the video. And then one of the things that we need to recommend to as well is training to the police officers. It is not just about policies and procedures, but it's about the police officer to have a appropriateness in that individual wearing the uniform. So, and again, we hear and we hear because the trauma that the civilians are being faced by the police officers. So again, to hear, this is one of the very unique cases right here that probably is not policy or process violation, but it is inappropriate. So what are we gonna do to make sure, that the police officers and the entire police force have and receive more training so we can avoid this type of cases of inappropriateness against citizens? I mean, to me, that's my case, and that's the way that I see it right now coming at the first meeting.
Yep, and I agree. Like, the board can absolutely recommend training for that officer. And I think, well, we might not, but until we make that recommendation,
I don't think we can make a recommendation based on that.
Well, listen, again, there's a lot of speculation. Did I say something wrong when I wanted to invite the chief here?
No, I think that's a great.
Her and ask her the questions instead of asking, the IG. And she may have some answers that none of us know.
Correct.
Right? So
Absolutely.
let's bring her here.
I agree
And
with
two-
that 100%.
Okay.
I think it would be good to invite her so she can answer questions, but also maybe just ask her to provide an update, because this is new for her division as well, right? Receiving the investigations from the IG's office. So, I would be curious to know if there is a process in place over there once she receives them. And if there is, where are they in that process? Or if they still need to build that out, okay. But at least we then have an idea of what is going on over there. But I think, her or an assistant chief or even the deputy chiefs or the command staff, I say invite them so we can get an update on where they are, because it's new to them as well. And I think we should take that into consideration.
And Chair Burns, if I may, 2 points of clarification. There have been a batch of investigations that have come back from CPD. I'm presuming all of those were findings of exonerated. They did not have to go through a disciplinary hearing process, right? So you can see some of those that have come back to the Inspector General's office. Is that correct, Nate?
So we do have, and this is the thing I wanted to be able to say to the board. Again, you're all are talking, so you're answering your own questions. This is very new. We've already signed off, the board has signed off, that process has went through to the chief. They have to go through the chain of command. Those reports are slowly coming back to our office, so we're able to see what the findings are. Some of the findings are stating that they confer with us. Some of them are stating that they don't confer. Some of the terminology versus unfounded versus exonerated, they're twisting I won't say they're twisting, their definition might be a little bit different, but they're not saying that the investigation was incomplete. They're just wording it a little bit different. And we do have a couple of cases where we have recommended sustained and they concur. So we're not sure where the disciplinary process is on the ones that are sustained because it is new. And it does have a process, and I have talked to the chief, and we do meet. So we're going to be looking at the ones that she wants to be able to see, the ones that we have submitted, and the ones that the chain of command has investigated. Are the findings the same or not? So we're kind of working on me giving her a spreadsheet, so she'll be able to see what our findings are and it compares it. So again, it's still very new. Everything is still working, there is still being worked out. I have talked to her. Once they make a decision, if there's something is sustained and some type of disciplinary action is going to take place, we will be having communication. She is aware that I would like to know what that looks like. Was disciplinary action rendered? Was there a grievance? But again, it's a process, just like, the board being appointed and having that process of reviewing investigations. It's the same thing going through CPD now. So there is something being done, just so that you are aware, but it's just a process. And what I will say is whatever the findings the board has, when we send a letter over to the chief is aware of that. We say, hey, this report is maybe what our findings are. Anything that the board recommends additional is added to that, so that they're able to see all of that information. All of that goes to the chief. But again, it is a process that does have to go through, and she will be the first to tell you, I'm sure that Tierra will say the same thing. Whatever the recommendations are, all of that is based on policy and procedure. It's also based on the collective bargaining agreement as to whether or not, disciplinary actions can even be brought. But it's still a process, but just letting you know, everything is occurring.
And I appreciate
If I could, just to remind folks, I let everyone know at our last meeting what issues we would be asking for report outs from. And so just so we remember, we have already asked for a report on return recommendations. We have asked for the chief or a rep from CPD to come talk to us specifically about the body-worn camera policy. We've asked that Mr. Furby come and give us a case law update in the next few months. We've asked for the public safety director to come and speak with us. We've also asked, which you just did, the IG to give us an update. So those things are being scheduled. They just haven't happened yet. And that is the unfortunate reality of where we fall in time. So there is already a request for the chief or someone from CPD to come to our meeting. There's a request for Public Safety Director Bashadi to come to our meeting, for Mr. Furby to come give us a case law update. So some of these things, we're repeating ourselves a bit. So just to remind us that I did let everyone know these are the things I'd be asking to happen in the next few months. And so they will be, but they haven't happened yet. And so if you all want to make a recommendation on this case, I'd say do it, because I don't know that we're going to get any forward movement unless we actually make a motion for it.
So, I just disagree on that point about forward movement. I think in this particular case, forward movement, yes, we have to actually make a recommendation one way or the other to move ahead. But as far as what we're trying to do as a board here, I think our process by which we are going through, meeting multiple times a month, subcommittee meetings, reviewing these cases on top of the investigation that has already occurred, and then bringing that to then spend the entire board meeting, usually in the future, or most board meetings, to then go over the cases and then to not hear back on what has happened since. I worry that we don't stop and look at what are the patterns, what are the practices, what are the policies that need to be addressed. And so I'm fine with us continuing this process of just kind of reading things out. But in terms of communicating to the public and those who file complaints, I don't even know what somebody thinks about what is even happening with the board, right? Somebody files a complaint, there's an investigation that's reviewed, and then the process is ongoing. But in terms of our communication back to the public about, keeping folks updated, I don't know what's happening. And so I'm fine for us to move this along. It would also be my recommendation for the city or some entity figuring out a way for us to track this in a public database that anybody, any resident can have access to, so that they can track, similar to what's happening in the IG's office, but anybody can have access to, so they can track what is happening with each case, each recommendation, and what the status of that particular case is. And so, happy to move ahead with this, but again, I worry that we're just going to keep doing this without having any sense of what we're even recommending. That's all. So, with that said, in this particular case, if our recommendation for our subcommittee is we believe it was a violation, that it rises to the level of misconduct, and so do you have?
I'll
Okay.
ask my question after you're finished.
Okay. That's what we believe.
Ask,
Let's
is
add
there
it
a
to the
directive
attachment.
or rule or policy that you're going to refer to that was violated?
I think whether we've talked about work rule, we've talked about the some violation of misconduct in this particular instance. I think the policy itself that was potentially the subject was the misconduct policy. But again, you all made the determination that it didn't rise to the level. Was that what I'm hearing? That it didn't rise to the level?
What is it that you mean when you say the misconduct policy? Are you talking about a specific one?
Yeah. So
Right. I just want to make sure you're clear on which one.
Yeah. So in that instance, if somebody is showing it in this particular case, showing somebody getting shot, or somebody getting shot to the nurse, and then you all highlighted one of the policies. I'm trying to pull up the exact one. It was general rules.
But I will add that one of the things, just so in the future, what the board will be getting from my office is, now that we've been doing this, we have some data. We don't want to come and give you one or two cases. We are looking at complaints, and we're looking at a series of similar complaints that we get, where we see the same issues over and over again, where there may not be a policy violation, but we feel that there needs to be something additional. So again, to the board, if the board is able to say, hey, this is something we looked at, we feel this is an issue we want to add, we add that information and we hold on to that. But when I will be presenting a memo to the board, is to be able to give you some stats to say, over such and such a time, this is what we've looked at, be able to tell you what cases we review, and that we see an issue with something occurring and reoccurring that may not arise to a policy violation, but we feel something should be done.
Okay.
So again, just kind of going on advice of my counsel, we're not able to put those type of recommendations in these reports. We either can say whether a policy was violated or not. That's something, a separate memo that the board will be getting in the future. But again, we have to do that based on some stats and stuff that we can show you, that we see some patterns occurring.
Okay, so that's super helpful. I think that is something that I would like to see in terms of, in this instance, whether or not, again, just based on the conversation we just had, whether I can point to a specific policy that I don't know how that helps. To me,
I think it would help. So I'm just going off of what our subcommittee does sometimes, because we don't always agree with the findings of the IG's office. And then when that happens, we will either say something like, we'll either identify a work rule or something like that, or we will simply say, this was just a bad decision on behalf of the officer, and we think this should be reviewed, or some policy, or they should establish a policy to provide some guidance to officers. Did you all think about doing anything like that as you were reviewing your? Because on the investigation review sheets, which you all use them, there actually is a section down, good job. There's a section down there that actually says, do you agree? And it has you put some comments, and if you disagree, what would that disagreement be? And what are your recommendations moving forward? And so I think that'll help put a little bit of context around it.
So no, I completely agree. And when we provide the report out overviews, we include the notes that include just that piece. The question, though, is that we are making a bunch of recommendations and having no sense as to what is happening with those recommendations. And so while I think that's helpful, to me,
That would be helpful in this minute because you're about to ask for a vote in which you disagree. And so that would help us at least have an idea of what your thought process is going in terms of your recommendation.
So kind of each of the allegations has a policy or procedure.
this
I
would
would
be,
go through each one and just make sure you have a policy or procedure that you are going to motion that the board sustain a finding of misconduct on.
this would be CBD Directive 101 Rules of Conduct for this instance. As noted here, the IG's office finds that it does not rise to the level. I don't know somewhere to put in the notes that I think it does rise to that level, and that our subcommittee came to that agreement, and so we believe that should be sustained for allegation 1, exonerated for allegation 2, which was also the recommendation of the Department of Inspector General. And so we would, I know we talked about how we actually motion this. I think we have to motion it separately. I'm not sure what we made the
Because
decision.
you're not adding a new complaint. You're just
Okay.
disagreeing with the finding. It can be one motion.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion for case number 230154 for sustained for allegation 1, which we believe is a violation of Police Rules Misconduct 101, and which is in conflict with the Department of Inspector General determined, and a motion or exonerated for allegation 2, which is the recommendation of the Department of Inspector General.
I'll second that.
All right, there's been a motion and a second. Any questions or discussion? All right, normally I would reserve voting, but I will vote now so that we can take a break before we come back to the other cases. All in favor of adopting the recommendation of the subcommittee, please?
Before you take the vote, we just put on the record the abstentions from the new board members.
Sure. All in favor, please raise your hands or say aye. And we have abstentions from our 3 new board members. Motion carries. Thank you. Let's take a 10-minute break. Returning back to Mr. Strickland's subcommittee, there are still 6 cases left on that committee for review. Mr. Strickland?
Can we move on to somebody else? Subcommittee?
What do you mean?
Like, just go to another subcommittee.
But you still have your one
From
spot.
last time? 6? From last time? Really? Which one? Sorry, I was. Oh, these.
0556-0111.
All right, let me.
This is going to be the 45
I know.
second version.
I'm like, can we just? Okay, let me. Sorry about that, folks. I thought I read these already.
This is when brevity comes into play.
I got it.
You're getting it from both sides.
Are you?
You really are, Kyle.
All right, I see some here. Okay. I think some of the numbers are off, sorry. But I can read the ones that come up. The one that I do have is case number 230111. The complainant alleged that on February 3rd, 2023, after being advised that the jail could not accept the arrestee without the appropriate paperwork, the CPD officer stated that the arrestee could walk out of the front door / be let go for all he cared as he was leaving in 2 months and didn't give a F. This was the one where I think there was another similar case. This might have been the same case. And so I don't know if that was like we got that same case for whatever reason. So the recommendation there was sustained, and we agree with it. I don't know if that's the same case though, but if we, okay.
Because we thought we had seen that case before.
Yeah.
We heard the same facts.
Complaints that I will say, I don't know if someone is just listening, but there'll be some more complaints that we're going to get where we've had some complainants that were stating officers have made statements like that they're retiring, so I don't.
And so that's something, I guess either way, that's something for us to consider as a board. I mean, if there's no, I don't know what the discipline process would be or what process is if somebody is retiring or leaving, and they make a statement like that, what that means in terms of what the police chief does or can do, or the safety director can do in that instance. But something to look at the very least, so that you don't have folks who are about to leave who can just say these things. So.
So 23-01111 has been decided previously.
Got it. Okay, great. Thank you so much. These other cases here, 050, are these all mine?
I have 050.
There we go.
72, 73, and 76.
Okay, great.
Okay.
I'm sitting here.
I don't have 0556, though.
We got that one.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
Do you want me to?
Please.
Sure, unless, so has 0556 been resolved then? Or has that one not been?
Kyle was going to read over it to see what he thought. I thought had come to a
Okay.
conclusion, but he was going to read that and get back.
Okay, so we'll table 556 then, and then Board Member Younger, I will turn it over to you for the last
All
four.
right, I'm going to do 72, 73, and 76 because they're quick, and then I'll do 050. All right, so case number 2023-0072. This is a misconduct case. The allegation is officers entered complainant's home without permission to look for his relative. On January 27, 2023, a complaint was filed alleging that CPD officers entered complainant's home without permission to search for a relative. He believed that they had no right to come in and search his home with a misdemeanor warrant. Per complainant, they came in, asked for his nephew, he was not there, and they left. The IG requested CAD materials, unit history data, BWC of the officers dispatched to the call. The CAD data indicated this was a self-initiated call by one officer to apprehend a wanted person. Officers got there, there was an open door. It was the address of the wanted person and the complainant's address also. Ohio Revised Code, Section 293512 states, officers have the right to enter the home of a subject of an arrest warrant if the address on the warrant is the same as the address being searched for the subject. The DIG reviewed the BWC of 3 officers. All 3, the BWC showed that all 3 were in accordance. They went to the door, apprehended the subject, to apprehend the subject of the arrest warrant. 2 went to the front door, saw the lights on. They were told by the third that the back door was unlocked. They were uncomfortable about pushing the door open, so they called their sergeant for guidance. Sergeant gave them permission to enter. They opened the door, announced they were CPD, made a second announcement, talked to the complaining witness, and he said that the subject of the warrant wasn't there. They continued searching. They explained that the back door was unlocked. Since he wasn't there, they apologized about the incident, talked again, looked for him a little bit longer in the house. They verified with the sergeant as to what happened. And then the reason for this was the warrant was for violation of a protection order. And at this point in time, the recommendation of the IG is that it be closed with an exoneration. Officers were within the scope of CPD directive and standard operating procedures. Our committee concurs with the finding of the IG. At this time, we move, do I move now or do we discuss first?
You make the motion.
Okay. We move at this time to accept the recommendation of the IG as to case number 2023-0072.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All right, we'll withhold voting until you make it through all your cases, Board Member Young.
All right. 2023-0073. This is, all right. Statement of facts. Let's see what this is real quick. All right, this is a quick one, too. Statement of facts. On January 23rd, 2023, complainant alleged that he was pulled over and placed in the back of a cruiser for 20 minutes, long after they knew that he was no longer the suspect in this particular incident. They also handcuffed him, so circulation was cut off, hands injured, and back hurt. He went to the ER and had to do follow-up. The DIG requested CAD, reviewed the BWC for both officers, and also interviewed both officers. The BWC and the statements were consistent. The license plate reader detected that this was a stolen plate on the vehicle, and the traffic stop was initiated as a high risk. The BWC showed the officers conducting the stop. They placed the complainant in the rear of the cruiser, asked him questions to clarify the license plate issue. The complainant became overheated, and one officer told him to shut up, and another did call him an asshole. Officer spoke to supervisor as he advised that, and he advised that they could not take the plates because the vehicle did not belong to the complainant. But that he should get new plates. The problem, the issue here was that the wrong plates were with the wrong car, and this was not his car. The interaction lasted 25 minutes. He was in handcuffs for exactly 11.5 minutes. The BWC did not show force used when the complainant was taken into custody. The conclusion of the IG was as to, and here's the allegations. Allegation number 1, officers used excessive force by squeezing his fingers together when placing him in handcuffs and raised his hands above his shoulders. Allegation number 1, the BWC shows no force during the stop. The recommendation is unfounded because it didn't show that fingers were squeezed together, raised above arms raised above his shoulders. As to allegation number 2, there are 3 allegations. Officers left him in the back too long after they knew he was no longer a suspect. They only left him back there 11.5 minutes, and this was the time that it took to investigate the license plate issue, and that it didn't belong to that vehicle. And there is an allegation number 3, and this was an allegation that was added by the Department of the Inspector General. The first officer used profanity throughout the stop. The second officer was discourteous and told the complaining witness to shut up. So this allegation was brought by the Inspector General. Now, the allegation was M1 used profanity throughout stop, and officer was discourteous when she said to shut up. There is a recommendation to sustain these findings. Okay, so our committee concurs with the findings of the IG. We move at this time to accept the recommendation as to allegations 1 and 2 on case number 2023-0073, and furthermore, we move to accept the allegation of the Department of the Inspector General as to number 3 as to case number 2023-0073.
It's been moved. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, any discussion? All right, we'll withhold the vote until Board Member Younger's done.
The third case is 2023-0076. The allegation here is that officers should have transported her daughter to Nationwide Children's Hospital, like protocol states, after she threatened to commit suicide. The complainant alleged misconduct from an event when officers brought her daughter home after she ran away to her boyfriend's house at approximately 7:50 a.m. Officers left, and she and her daughter got into a physical. There were 2 incidences where police were called to this particular residence. Complaining witness and her daughter got into a physical/verbal altercation, and then that was the first call, and then they were called back. While the officers were there on the second call, the daughter was yelling and that she wanted to kill herself. Mom left After this yelling back and forth at each other, et cetera, Mom decided that she would leave and go to work. The officer, she called at 11 o'clock, and the daughter did not return the call, so Mom called police for a wellness check. The daughter was found with a pill bottle next to her. She was transported to Mount Carmel for hospitalization, and Mom believes that this could have been avoided if the officers had transported. The IG gathered CAD, BWC, unit history, DV report as to the prior incident when mother called police because of the DV against daughter hit her. She filed the DV report. What other? All right, BWC revealed one officer, during the second call, the one officer did a one-on-one with the daughter. He offered to take her to school. They were there for approximately 30 minutes. There was a lot of, the officer took a lot of time with this young lady, and she mentioned nothing about suicide until Mom mentioned school, and then she yelled from the top of the steps, "Okay, I want to kill myself." The officers told Mom that she would have to follow them to the hospital. This is per BWC. And Mom said, nah, she said, I have to go to work. Daughter and Mom got into another fight at that point, and there was no more talk about the hospital. CPD Directive Number 3.05, officers shall take individual into custody, transport, if he/she represents substantial risk of physical harm to self as evidenced by threats, attempts at serious, or attempts or serious infliction of serious physical harm. Officers were interviewed, and they said they both did not find that daughter's threats credible. There was no probable cause to take her, forcibly take her to the hospital. The daughter did not, they thought that the daughter just simply did not want to go to school. Mom did not want to go along to the hospital. So at this point, the IG finding is, as to allegation one, is that both officers are to be exonerated. We concur with the IG, and we move to accept the findings of the IG as to case number 2023-0076.
It's been moved. May I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Yeah, I mean, in that particular instance, is there any other aspect of what should have been done or what could have been done with other agencies involved?
I think, my group, if you guys want to come in, I think they pretty much, they were there approximately a half hour. They had been there twice that day. The first was a DV against the daughter. Mom called it in. And the second,
Wellness check was.
a wellness check, thanks. And they did just that. Now, could they have referred it, or,
Yeah,
So,
well,
yeah.
what really, to sum it up, what happened is that Mom didn't want to go tag along. She wanted to go to work.
So I think this is an indication, though, in terms of, thinking through of different policy, different agencies involved, thinking about other alternative response models in this instance here of different agencies that could have been involved. I agree in terms of what the ultimate finding will be, but I did want to make a note of that in terms of whether, what the referral process is or isn't in those particular situations so that we don't have an instance in the future.
Are you suggesting that maybe, I don't know, should we make a recommendation?
No, obviously, I don't know where these recommendations go, so I really,
know.
I just wanted to put a note out there in terms of thinking about, and again, maybe this is something, I know we do these readouts and summaries and reports, but as we're thinking about in the future iterations, we set aside our full meeting time to talk about the trends and kind of the policy changes that need to occur, just so that it's a little bit more efficient. But in this particular case, I just wanted to make that note, but we don't need to physically put it in the record anywhere. But just in terms of how we're thinking about how we communicate to a particular complainant or whatever that communication looks like, knowing that there are other, there are other agencies or thinking about what a process could look like in the future for these situations.
Although I agree with you, Kyle, a lot of that, though, because that was a minor, has to surround the parent. And although the police are a policing agency, they are not a social agency. So I think we have to kind of be careful about what lines and they're going to cross. Maybe they could have brought in social children's services or something, but I really think, that by them asking the mother, would you like for us to take you guys to the hospital? And she said she was more concerned about going to work than she was about her daughter. I think right there kind of ends their responsibility when it comes to that, because they offered
Yes.
to
And in review of that case, it was very evident that the police done their job. They went and done the wellness check and went twice, and were willing to transport the young lady. And mom said, I can't go. They can't transport the mom or the daughter without the mother.
Yeah. No, I think that's helpful. And I think in this case, I don't necessarily think there's a violation here, but I do think that when, as a board thinking about policy practice, this is maybe a situation in which there might not have been a violation, but thinking about what different agencies or referrals can look like, so that if police couldn't do something in a particular instance, that there's another agency, social workers or services, somewhere else. Just something to think about in terms of making sure folks have access to resources, because somebody ultimately did file a complaint, right? And so, that as a response, I think is might be useful.
Kyle, mom filed the complaint because she thought that the officer should have transported the daughter, to Children's Hospital. I mean, this case kind of bothered me a little bit too, because the daughter's at 7:50 in the morning. She's at her boyfriend's house, coming home from her boyfriend's house. It's a mess. But I don't know that there's anything that the police can do here.
But in terms of how we communicate, back to, I mean, I don't know in terms of what the communication looks like, other than just like, here's the investigation memo and this was a finding, violation or not. I do think about, there are how we communicate, hey, even if somebody tries to go through this process and says, look, like, this is not a violation, but there are other resources available to you, whatever that standard type of response might be, I think would be helpful in that.
Any other discussion? All right, we'll withhold voting. Go ahead, Board Member Younger.
And the last case, 2023-0050. Complaint came from Franklin County Juvenile Center. The allegation was that the officers brought a juvenile from Richland County without proper documentation. The paperwork itself, according to the report, stated that this is not an arresting warrant. The clerk checked with her supervisor, the clerk at Juvie, checked with the supervisor and asked officers to leave and acquire the proper paperwork. The officers would not leave the Sally Port with the youth, and security had to be sent to tell them to leave until they had proper documentation. They said they would not leave until they emailed for proper documentation, and it arrived. And they contacted their sergeant, which is what they should have done. In this situation, the sergeant was not available because he was handling an active event that was going on. So the IG investigated. They spoke with the clerk, the supervisor at FCJC, the two officers. They gathered all ORC provisions, police directives, CAD, BWC of both officers. They interviewed both officers. I'm sorry? Okay. BWC is only turned off while you're at the juvenile facility because that's the rule. All right. So here's the situation. The allegation, of course, is CPD brought a juvie to without proper documentation, asked to leave. by the supervisor would not leave. There's Officer C and Officer R. Officer C was interviewed. He did not leave the facility because he believed that there was ample parking for all vehicles. He said it made no sense to leave and maybe get into a car accident while paperwork was being requisitioned. The paperwork received ended up being the same as the original. He said it took approximately 25 minutes. Officer R was interviewed. He stated they had, he was kind of the main officer. He stated they had the U-10 and 2 documents from Richland County. He was told he had no arrest warrant, and he said he would get it worked out, which he was doing that with his, he had emailed Richland County. He contacted Richland County to have the paperwork sent. He said it took approximately 30 minutes. When asked to leave the Sallyport, he thought leave Sallyport and not the facility. Officer R stated that he had never encountered this before. So he himself thought he was confused about what he should leave. He thought leave the Sallyport, not the whole facility. So he was not aware that a facility supervisor could ask him to leave. Officer R felt safer staying at the facility, he said, than driving around. The conclusion of the Inspector General is that, to bottom line this, is, let's see, well, I'm just going to read it real quick.
Summary?
Kyle, I summarized the summary. I'm sorry, that's just how I work.
Well, I know, but.
Officer R did refuse to leave the Sallyport when requested, did contact his supervisor, but supervisor involved in an active situation. He did contact Richland County to resolve the issue. The IG states that the supervisor at FCJC made an error by believing that the original document was not an arrest warrant. Richland County verified. Thus, even though ORC states that the officers are to follow the rules of the detention center, the supervisor not so here, since the supervisor was in error. Thus, the officer is exonerated. Officer C also is exonerated by the Inspector General. Our subcommittee discussed this at two meetings. And I also, since it was my case, then I got in touch with the Inspector General and discussed it ahead of time so that we could be prepared here. And the issue basically is not whether the paperwork is correct or not. The issue is to follow Police Directive 3.03 and the Ohio Revised Code. And our subcommittee sustains the allegation brought by FCJC, and we would, at this time, not follow the recommendation of the Inspector General. We believe that CPD did not comply with CPD Directive 3.03, the transporting slating procedures for detention centers. Number 1 states follow procedure established by the detention facility. That is, the supervisor is in charge, not CPD. And also, Ohio Revised Code Section 5139.01, only charged juvies can be on a facility. And since that warrant, first of all, on it indicated this is not an arresting warrant, and since the facility supervisor rules, and since he was not accepting it, the police officer needed to get off of there, off of those grounds, get proper paperwork, and then come back. So we move at this time to sustain the allegation presented by FCJC in case number 2023.0050. Furthermore, we move the police directive concerning the transportation of prisoners, juveniles to detention center 3.01 through 3.05 be reviewed or taught to the two officers involved. And further, when juveniles are transported, provisions be made to have the proper paperwork for presentation at the facility be recognized, and, wait a minute. And further, when juveniles are transported, provisions be made that proper work be ready for presentation, and have the supervisor at that facility be recognized as having the power given to him or her by the provisions of the Ohio Revised Code.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, now, look, any discussion?
Yeah. Is there a reason the Inspector General's office came to the conclusion of exonerated? And I know here you just mentioned you all disagreed and should be sustained. You pointed to a particular policy. Was that something that the Inspector General's office looked to? And I know we're back on the policy discussion, but
And I don't want to speak for the Inspector General's office by any means, but the law is clear. The law says if you're asked to leave, you leave. I'm not saying that I agree with the rule, but it is the rule. They didn't leave. It doesn't make any difference.
And for whatever reason, though, it seems, based on my understanding of the summary, that you all, the Inspector General's office, did not. I mean, you all said exonerated. So where's the disconnect?
Our chair is with juvenile, right? Our chair is the head of the whole shebang here. We should look to our chair to help us out here.
Well, so one, I haven't read that whole report, so I don't know what it has in it. However, I think irrespective of why the IG found exonerated, again, if your subcommittee thinks that it needs to be sustained, then there's no problem with us voting for sustaining and making that recommendation. That being said, I think separate from that, we can absolutely have a conversation and ask the question to the IG about it, but procedurally, I don't know that knowing the reasoning for the IG's exoneration, aside from me looking at the report itself, changes your motion or what we as a board can do.
Yeah, I mean, I am curious. I mean, because we were just talked about all this, the differences between the IG's reports and the board. So is there a particular reason? And because you all went back to the IG to, ask questions for the clarification. So I'm just curious as a board member here, why this Department of Inspector General made a different finding, or what they think about that particular policy provision that was pointed to.
We were looking at what the allegation was. And the allegation was that the officers were asked to leave the premises because the security staff stated the paperwork was incorrect. The paperwork was not incorrect. The paperwork that the officers had was correct. And they were working with the staff so that they understood that the paperwork was correct. Some of the staff that was there that day were new, and they didn't know that. And the paperwork that was requested to be faxed over just to try to appease the staff to understand that the paperwork they had was correct was the same identical paperwork that the officers had. And when the new paperwork did come over, it was in between staff change, and the new staff that had came on, supervisor, acknowledged that the paperwork that the officers had was correct paperwork. And so that was one of the reasons that we had exonerated it, because of exactly what the allegation was stating, that the officers were asked to leave because the paperwork was incorrect, and that was not the case. The paperwork was correct.
Thank you. And then given the addition here by the subcommittee, is there a particular reason that the Department of Inspector General did not add a sustained Department of Inspector General allegation, an additional allegation from the Department of Inspector General related to what was just discussed here about somebody being asked to leave and not leaving?
Well, we understand, again, we don't have an issue with the fact, if the board disagreed, they're able to disagree. And that is something that would be a concern, is the fact that the person that was there was asking the officer to leave. That, to me, I feel is kind of one of those situations where you're telling the officer to leave, the paperwork is incorrect. This officer is a seasoned officer, and he's trying to explain to the person, simply because he does understand that at this facility, staff changes. And he understood that the staff was new, and he was trying to work it out to appease them to understand, I hear what you're saying is incorrect, is correct. And so to get them to understand it was, well, why don't we just have them send additional paperwork, which is what they did. But it was the same identical paperwork. So we do understand that sometimes when you're working different facilities, you're going to have new staff. So we just felt that in this case, because it was even though the person who filed the complaint didn't realize, I don't know if they didn't realize it or not, but the person that filed the complaint will be able to state that the paperwork that the officer did give them was exactly the same paperwork.
If I could add something. The problem here is that we have a Columbus Police Division directive that says, follow procedures established by the detention facility. And then you have a detention facility, and then you have, at this detention facility, you have different jurisdictions that will be going to this facility. You have CPD, you have Whitehall, you have Bexley, you have who will be bringing juvies into this facility. And if each jurisdiction makes their own determination as to what paperwork is correct or what paperwork is not correct, that would be chaotic for that facility. And they're responsible, those people are responsible for the security of that facility. And so that is why Ohio Revised Code and police directives give them this power to control that facility so that they can secure those juveniles in that facility and not have chaos. And this is where I think it's very important that we were talking earlier about when we disagree with the IG and this goes to the chief of police, is she going to give, he, whoever's going to be reviewing this, are they going to give us, the board, credibility because we're not investigating? Are they going to give us as much, I don't know
Deference?
there you go, thank you. Because we're not an investigative branch, because we're looking here at the Ohio Revised Code and Police Directive that tells you directly what you need to do. You need to look at that.
And my assumption, though, is that, or my understanding is that the Department of Inspector General is also looking at the Ohio Revised Code in this particular instance, and there was the determination. I guess the question is, like, you all decided not to make, separate from that allegation that was there, to not make an additional sustained allegation, just like what the board made the recommendation for. There might have been a reason for that or limitations around that. I'm fine with if we want to go ahead and do that, but to me, just to the point we were talking about earlier, it's odd that the Department of Inspector General did not come up with that particular recommendation, and now we've added in this piece. I was just wondering why the Department of Inspector General did not add that as a second sustained allegation, given the additional conversations among the subcommittee with the Department of Inspector General.
Question, Board Member Younger. So this feels a little bit similar to a case that Review Subcommittee 1 has for today, in which a hospital policy is something that puts one requirement on all of us, but the issue we had was an officer didn't follow that hospital policy. And so I'm wondering if it's more akin to that, is when you have what feels like a competing policy or directive from one agency, and then you have a controlling agency that has its own statutes and guidelines, like which one controls, and it feels very similar. I personally, if that's what your subcommittee has decided, I don't have an issue with that. But I do wonder if this is another topic that we can get in front of us, is what happens with competing policies. You have like one authority, whether it's a city office or a hospital or a school, that they have a policy or they have a revised code that they're following, and then there's some sort of coming head to head with a CPD.
Revised code, though.
Yeah. No, I'm not disagreeing.
Oh, okay, I'm kind of.
Yeah,
revised
CPD
code.
is operating under its directive, which is bring this kid down to detention.
Yeah.
Detention operates under the authority of 5139, which says who you can accept and not accept.
True.
And you have, right. So just what happens when those two things compete?
I think we were thinking too that until that was resolved, that you have to go by the rule.
Yes.
There you
No, I get why you reached the conclusion you did. I don't have an issue with your conclusion.
Yeah, I don't have an issue at all with your conclusion. I'm confused as to whether the Department of Inspector General reviewed this particular revised code that they're referring to and what the determination of that was.
We reviewed the revised code, and I had a discussion not only with the investigator, but also with the supervisor. And again, based on, it wasn't the officer, when we look at whether the officer violated policy or procedure, we look at the intent. The officer was not intending to refuse leaving. The officer felt that when they were asking him to step away, it was because they were saying the paperwork you had was wrong. He was trying to explain to them and resolve that the paperwork he had was in fact the correct paperwork. So what we would have looked at, and I do know, in referring to Chair Burns, that we did investigate a complaint involving an officer not wearing a mask in a hospital facility. The difference was the officer was asked to put a mask on because that was their policy. He refused to put the mask on because he did not want to abide by the policy. We felt that the officer during the interview was not saying that he was refusing to not abide by. He was saying that they were saying the information you have is incorrect, and he was saying, no, this is in fact, the information. And we also looked at the fact that the information, we pulled the paperwork, the information that the officer had, the information that was faxed over was exactly the same information. We also looked at the years of experience of the officer and the fact that when the next staff came on, they acknowledged the fact that some of the people were new and were unaware that the paperwork, in fact, that the officer had was valid paperwork, and he should have been they should have accepted it and processed it. So we just looked at it as just being a miscommunication between the new staff. And so what we would have recommended, well, we don't have jurisdiction over that system, is that, just making sure that when you're bringing in new staff, that they're just, properly trained on the paperwork so that, this isn't a type of situation that would occur again in the future.
Thank you. And so given that information, it seems like the subcommittee still went ahead and because that explanation to me, that seems to make sense as to why you wouldn't have a sustained violation there in that particular instance. I don't know enough about this particular law in the revised code, but there was a clear sense of a miscommunication, it seems, in this instance. But even still, with that explanation and with the review, you all said, no, this is what the law says, and he should have left.
Well, we absolutely took that into consideration because what the IG explained is written here in the response in the email. But you have to. First of all, if you read in the report, in the IG's report, the analysis and findings, the complainant, who is FCJC, advised the officer their paperwork stated, supposedly, now I don't have the paperwork in front of me, but supposedly the paperwork itself stated this is not an arresting warrant. Now, maybe, I don't know exactly what the paperwork said, but if you look at the directive, the Police Directive 3.03, it says that you have to follow the procedures established by the detention facility. Yeah. And so the paperwork issue is rather irrelevant I mean, that is, yeah, paperwork,
Or if it was a mistake.
Yeah.
If at the time the detention center staff said, we're not taking this youth, you have to go,
yeah.
then
You fix it and you come back. But
Yeah.
the staff is, the supervisor is the one who is in charge. It's an issue of who is in charge. It's not a matter of, is the paperwork correct? It's who makes that determination. And the directives and the code tell you who is in charge.
Look, I appreciate that. I'm just saying, I mean, this is the Department Inspector General came up with that finding based on, and then you all had additional conversations, and it seems like, I don't know if there was any revisions made to the point earlier around, you all still decided, even after this discussion, or maybe that's something for further discussion, that you would not add a sustained Department Inspector General allegation here in this particular instance. I think this goes back to this recommendation, making it all the way to the police chief and safety director. And I mean, I don't know what the remedy in this particular situation is. If there was a misunderstanding, if the understanding was that there was a misunderstanding, to me, it seems like an odd, I don't know. It seems like an odd recommendation to make in this particular instance.
Well, we do have a first and second on the floor. I'm going to call it to vote along with the other cases. We've got 2023-050, 2023-072, 2023-073, 2023-076. Anticipating that 050 might have a different vote, let's consider 72, 73, 76. All in favor, please raise your hands. Note that we have 3 abstentions of our 3 new board members. Those 3 motions carry. Now turning to 2023-050, all in favor of accepting the subcommittee's recommendation, please raise your hands. Opposed? We have 4 abstentions. So that gave us what, 5? We had 5 in agreement. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes, motion carries. Thank you, Board Member Younger. Turning next to Subcommittee 1, yes.
May I just ask a question? During the discussion, you mentioned that the body-worn camera is not allowed to be used.
On the facility?
Is that for the sake of privacy of
For
the
the
juveniles?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I could imagine that an incident could occur that a body-worn camera evidence would be helpful in the same way that we've had this body-worn camera issue come up before regarding off-duty officers. It is, so they've weighed that and just said privacy of juveniles outweighs the threat to juveniles. Is that the thought?
I mean, I don't know the legislative history behind the policies, but generally speaking, most things that happen within the youth justice system are protected, and kids are anonymous. That's from the pleadings that are filed in court for
Okay.
them to even
I was
the fact that
curious
they're
about
in
why
detention.
we're, if there was an allegation of abuse by an officer, we don't have any corroborating evidence.
Certain youth prison systems have put body-worn cameras on staff and youth corrections officers, but not all local detention centers have that. All right, turning to Subcommittee 1, we'll start with your cases. I anticipate we will not get through with them, and I would like to stop at 4:57 just to make subcommittee assignments for our new team members. So you have 10 minutes.
Okay.
So we do case 23-0330.
We have not. That is Subcommittee 2, I believe that was given that, and I,
Would we be able to find it at the agenda?
let's see. So Subcommittee 2, have you looked at case number 2023-0330 as a subcommittee?
Which one is this?
That is one that was sent out after our last meeting because it was an extra one that came in. I'm assuming no. but I do have it listed to be covered along with 0556. Once they asked to have 0556 kicked to the next meeting, I figured 0330 would also be the next meeting too. All right, thanks. 0556 you did. 033.
Oh, we weren't 0556. We weren't
No,
the.
you weren't. You were the one that's just, you were going to review it and
Yeah,
get back with us.
and get back
We
with
were
us.
the ones that,
Yeah.
yep.
Yep.
And then, I don't know okay, we'll talk about the 33.
Yep, 03, if you look through email, 0330 was assigned to your subcommittee after our last meeting.
Got it.
Should I go?
Yes, please.
All right, I'm going to just read the last four digits, not the 2023. This is case 217. It's an allegation that an officer was driving erratically, going through stop signs, driving 40 miles an hour while he was driving erratically. Unfortunately, the complainant couldn't identify the officer or the car with the information provided by the complaint. The finding was unfounded. I move that we accept the IG's finding of unfounded in case number 217.
Second.
Okay, this is case number 224. There's an allegation that the officer was discourteous by refusing to wear a mask when entering a trauma unit. The finding was that the officer was not discourteous or uncivil, and so the Department of Inspector General found this to be unfounded. We agree with the finding, but we want to make a separate recommendation that officers be provided with training to wear masks when entering trauma units in the hospital, and that they follow hospital policies instead of coming up with their own discretion regarding whether they're going to follow hospital policies or a trauma unit's policies. So we move to accept the Inspector General's finding of unfounded, but I need a separate motion, right? A second motion that,
First motion.
oh, we need a second, I'm sorry.
Okay, second is there.
And then we have a second motion that this officer, did we want broader training? What were we?
Broader.
We
across
want
the-
broader training across the department regarding training officers to accept the hospital or trauma units policy regarding wearing masks when entering their units.
Second.
Out there. So there is a policy that for CPD officers to abide by the policies of the hospital. So we can get you that policy if you want.
Okay, then we might want to table this because we were, if, in that case, we may need a further discussion with the subcommittee regarding whether we believe that this finding was unfounded because they violated the hospital policy. What does our subcommittee wish to do?
I would agree with that, because we were under the impression that there
Yes,
was not.
precisely.
Which is why we had agreed with
Sustained and then-
sustained. Yeah, and so now we're hearing that there is a policy.
And so you
Yeah.
still found
This
that,
was this was rude and discourteous.
well, it might have been what they said, but we would come back then with a different rule to say that their conduct was a violation of, perhaps a work rule or something like that. So it may be that the allegation was rude or discourteous. Whether that was the case, we would add our own allegation because they're violating a policy. So we might want to,
I can get that to you.
thank you.
I mean, I just
Yeah.
have a general, I mean, you did not find that it was rude or discourteous? Somebody wasn't following the mask policy that they asked them to? Or I'm just trying to get a sense of.
The write-up, he wasn't
Okay.
The write-up.
Like what he
Was
said.
what he said and his disposition and demeanor, that wasn't rude.
Okay. Is there a reason? What was the reason they didn't want to wear the mask when they were asked to?
It's personal preference, I think.
Yeah.
And did they, I mean, what was the kind of engagement with the, I mean, somebody ultimately filed a complaint, so I just wanted to get a sense of, was there a back and forth, or what, I mean, what happened in that instance?
He said, no, I don't wear a mask. They said, it's unfortunately your policy. The officer responded, I don't care if it's your policy. Unfortunately, you'll have to leave. And he said, yeah, and then he left. Sorry, I
Yeah.
don't wear them.
Yeah.
I don't wear a mask.
You can refer it back to the IG for consideration under the other policy
Yes,
to
that's what
follow
I'd like,
hospital
that's what
policies.
I
You could refer
think
it back.
we would like to do, refer it back for, adding a different allegation, not rude or discourteous, but perhaps a violation of their policy.
So in that, I mean, how is that, I mean, I guess just insight here, I mean, how is that a violation of the I mean, if he just left? I mean, I think generally he was staying there and he was saying, no, I'm not gonna, I'm not leaving, I'm gonna violate your policies, but he was informed of the policy violation and he said, well, I'm not doing it, and so then he left. So to me, I don't see that there was a violation.
We would take it back to the subcommittee and we would discuss it further to decide.
Well, I mean, but what's there to decide? Even if there's I mean, aren't we talking about?
We want to discuss it to figure out the best course of action for that, whether or not it would be to refer or whether or not he did violate policy because he left.
Yeah, but I get that piece, but it eventually is going to come back to this board to have the same discussion.
Yeah, I will say, I mean, if the policy was you have to follow their policies, they told him about the mask, he said, I don't wear it, and he left, then there's really no violation. If he had stayed and continued to conduct business and left the mask, but again, I don't want to get into your discussion, but you can vote on it today if you want. You can refer it back to the committee, or you can refer it back to the IG.
Yeah, I mean, I would just personally be in favor of voting on it. To me, that doesn't seem to be a violation. I think.
Actually, I think it would be
initially had.
good to have our subcommittee look it over just to make sure that we're stating the facts. I didn't actually do my devotions over this case. So, okay.
I just know we had another case very similar. That's the reason we know there is, because we had an actual officer who was in the hospital that was asked to wear a mask. And based on what we were able to say is he took the mask and did not put the mask on. So he did violate a policy, because CPD's policy does state that, yeah. And this officer in this incident just left.
So let's table 234, but let's take the vote on 217 because we have an open motion. Was there any discussion on 217? All right,
That was the driving erratically case.
all in favor of passing the motion, please raise your hands. All right, note that we have 4, or any opposed? All right, we have 4 abstentions.
Is there a reason our new members are abstaining?
3 abstentions.
Oh, did Mark, sorry, I didn't see it. Oh, okay, thank you. Because they did not actually review, they didn't participate in any of the subcommittee reviews for these cases.
I get that piece, but we don't participate in the other subcommittee cases, and we still vote on those cases. I'm not saying that I'm putting you guys on the spot, but I'm just saying we don't either, but we bring it to this for full discussion.
Our council let us know at the beginning of the meeting that they would not be able to vote on prior business.
Because it was prior business,
Got
and they were not sworn in until today.
Okay, perfect. Sounds good.
All right. Sorry, Pastor, that is, I should say Board Member Nathan or Pastor Nathan, but he's also been my pastor. So that is it for our review subcommittee, because we need to make assignments. That's not untrue. All right.
It's factual, folks.
It is. All right. So for our subcommittees, could the members of Subcommittee 1 raise your hands? We are going to, let's see. Yes, we are going to add a member. I want to make sure I'm doing it the right way. Mr. Vicente, we are going to add you to our subcommittee.
All right.
So we will make sure, Rich is our subcommittee chair, so we'll make sure that he gets your contact information so that we can coordinate to add you to our next meeting. Subcommittee 2, could you all raise your hands? All right, we are actually going to add Ms. Pinkleton and Dr. Ford to Subcommittee 2.
So welcome. I think that's great and wonderful. And why we are adding subcommittees that don't have odd numbers. So what is there particular? Shouldn't we have odd numbers on that?
Our rules and regulations allow for members of 3 or 4 for those review subcommittees. And so I am probably likely to step down from a subcommittee because I am the chair. So rather than doing all the things I currently do and participate on a subcommittee, that's likely. And so that leaves one person who would be left off a subcommittee. I don't know that that's really helpful.
Well, I did want to also put in a potential recommendation, as I indicated before, of having larger subcommittees, maybe 2 large subcommittees, and that way there can be you can have alternate rotations. I just want to put that out there.
And I absolutely think we can still rotate memberships, but for right now, our rules and regulation currently have in it subcommittees of 3 or 4 people for review subcommittees. And so unless and until we vote to change that document, that is the maximum number of people that we have provided for in our rules and regs. All right? I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Seconds. All in favor, please raise your hands. All right, see you very shortly as we are right back together
Next week.
next week.